yesterday, so brighter skies for many, especially towards the west and later on the south. But across northern Scotland and eastern England, we'll see showers increasingly develop, and those showers will be turning increasingly to sleet and snow for the far north of Scotland. That's where it's going to feel coldest, especially as the wind picks up later in the day. But in the south, with lighter winds, well, it's not going to feel too pleasant with some sunshine, I think. Temperatures still a little below average, mid to high single figures. Into Tuesday night, and the snow increasingly affecting the north of Scotland. And for Wednesday, that snow's really going to build up at 2 to 5 centimetres at lower levels, 10 to 20 over the hills. It's going to feel cold everywhere.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up today, more crisis talks to avert the Christmas rail strikes due to be held this afternoon after the RMT union rejected the latest pay offer. Meanwhile, the trade body representing Britain's bars and restaurants say the industrial action will cost them around £1.5 billion in lost trade if things aren't fixed. Labour says it wants to radically reform Britain by moving jobs outside London, abolishing the House of Lords and banning MPs from having a second job. But critics say it's high on ideals, low on details. And why doctors are being warned to start taking the threat of Strep A more seriously after at least 7 children died from the infection. Antibiotics are now back on the treatment list, it seems. And England expects how their victory over Senegal has got all the pundits reassessing the team's World Cup prospects. And what are your thoughts on what's happening as we face this severe weather warning coming up? Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk and let us know how you're weathering this winter of discontent. Before that, the latest news headlines with Rosie.
Thank you, Mark. A very good afternoon to you. It's 3 minutes past 12. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Labour says it's going to look at abolishing the House of Lords if it wins the next general election. They've described the current system as indefensible. Sir Keir Starmer set out his blueprint for a new Britain, promising the biggest ever transfer of power from Westminster to nations and regions if his party comes into power. Launching a report which was led by the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, he promised to overhaul the way the country's governed.
If Labour wins the next election, Britain will see a change not just in who governs, but how we are governed. The tools to a fairer society and a stronger economy placed directly in the hands of working people. So together we can build an economy not just for the many, but by the many and of the many.
Some breaking news for you now. Police Scotland have been dealing with an incident at Glasgow Airport. An area's been cordoned off and a bomb disposal unit was called to the airport after a suspicious item was reported. Passengers have been unable to check in this morning and some flights have been delayed. As a precautionary measure, the check-in and security hall areas were evacuated, with people sent to the multi-storey car park outside. Police were alerted to the incident just before 6 a.m. this morning. Emergency units are still on the scene. We'll bring you more information on the story as it develops. The UK's biggest business group says there'll be a decade of lost economic growth in Britain if action isn't taken by the government. The CBI says it's likely the country's already in recession, with rocketing inflation, negative growth and falling productivity. The group say stagflation, a combination of stagnation and rising prices, is preventing firms from investing. The Transport Secretary Mark Harper says the RMT's decision to reject an improved pay offer is incredibly disappointing and unfair to the public. It was a pay rise of 8% and a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies before April 2024 that had been tabled. But the UK's biggest rail union said the deal wouldn't protect its members and would lead to unsafe practices. The strike action is therefore due to go ahead for 4 days this month. Meanwhile, 33,000 members of the Fire Brigades Union will vote today if they should walk out following a 5% pay offer. The FBU says striking is the last resort, but that many, they say, are desperate, with some struggling to afford to live. Firefighter and trade unionist Paul Embry says they've been left with no option.
We're being asked to take another significant real terms pay cut, and at a time when firefighters, like everybody else across the country, are really struggling to make ends meet. I've been a firefighter for 25 years, and this is the first time really that I've had colleagues say to me they can't afford to buy their kids Christmas presents. They're struggling to pay their mortgage bills, their energy bills, etc. So it's a decision that none of us want to take, but when you consider the paltry pay offer that's been tabled, we've really been left with no other option, frankly.
The government set out plans to overhaul NHS pension rules in an attempt to retain more senior doctors. The proposals would allow staff to claim their pension benefits but continue working and contributing to that pension, and also it would remove barriers to retired clinicians returning to work. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the move will help open up extra GP appointments. England forward Raheem Sterling has flown back to the UK after intruders broke into his home. Surrey police say watches and jewellery were stolen, but confirmed the Chelsea winger's family weren't in the house at the time of the robbery. The manager, Gareth Southgate, says family's the most important thing and didn't say whether the player will return to Qatar for the World Cup. Well, England will play defending champions France in the quarter-finals on Saturday. It's after the Three Lions comfortably beat Senegal 3-0 last night in Qatar. It was Jordan Henderson, captain Harry Kane and Bukayo Saka who all scored. You're now up to date on GB News, and I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, back to Mark.
Rosie, thanks very much indeed. So another crucial day for Britain's industrial relations, with talks aimed at averting train strikes before Christmas to continue. After the RMT union rejected the latest from train companies, they're also talking to Network Rail. Also, 33,000 firefighters now being balloted over whether to take strike action in their dispute over pay. They've rejected a 5% offer as derisory. Well, joining us now, Steve Headley, who's a former Senior Assistant General Secretary at the RMT Union. Steve, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Just to pick up on what I was mentioning there, as far as the RMT is concerned, they've got this two-pronged issue, one with the train operating companies and the second with Network Rail itself. And I understand that Network Rail has said that they've got to get some kind of agreement by the end of today to avoid problems further this week and onwards.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the government have been an obstacle, and actually the companies making any offer. The ministers involved have forbidden the companies to make a written offer up until yesterday, I believe. And the offer that came on the table isn't an 8% offer, it's 8% over 2 years. So we already have inflation at 11% this year, and it's forecast to be at least 8% next year. So that totals 20%. So really, what they're talking about is an offer of a pay cut in real terms of 12%, which is totally unacceptable. But what I will say is I think this is just a bit of window dressing, this is a bit of pantomime, because the government knows that a deal has been done in Scotland, in my opinion, a very bad deal, where a deal of 5% plus £750, which isn't consolidated, has been put on the table and accepted in Scotland. So that's half the rate of inflation, plus a £750 bung, which has solved the disputes in Scotland. And I think that the trade union bureaucrats and the government really both know that something like that has to be put on the table in order to encourage members to vote for the deal. I hope members don't, because that's still be well below the rate of inflation.
Well, yeah, but obviously it's up to them what they decide to do. In terms of Network Rail, then, I think that the best and final offer they said was 5% this year and then 4% next year. But both Network Rail and the train operating companies, no compulsory redundancies in either aspect. And this is the other part of it, of course. It's not just about pay, is it? It's about modernisation and what happens to jobs, particularly at ticketing offices, for instance.
Yeah, well, look, I think the no compulsory redundancies thing's a bit of a red herring, and I'll tell you why. I think that the demographics in the industry is that if they put out voluntary redundancies, the voluntary redundancies are going to be oversubscribed because people in their 50s and early 60s are just going to want to leave anyway. So I think that's a little bit of a sweetie to the trade unions, a bit of a sweetener. They'll say we've got no compulsory redundancies for 3 or 4 years, but those jobs will be lost on a voluntary basis, which will mean that work-life balances are going to be destroyed because you're going to have people having to work more nights, more weekends to cover the shifts that are going to be lost through people actually taking voluntary redundancy. So it's a bit of a face saver that they've thrown in for the trade union bureaucracy, who can then say, well, we've only got 5%, but we've got a no compulsory redundancy deal, which in reality is meaningless.
Yeah. OK, but I'm just trying to sort of... it is very complex to get to the gist of the dispute itself. I mean, for instance, Mick Lynch has said that a lot of this is about safety on the rails, for instance, i.e. if you take the guard away and just the driver's in charge of the train, that's not safe. But, I mean, that has been achieved at some rail companies, such as Thameslink, for instance.
Well, I think the latest figures are about 70% of the network is still have guards or someone similar to a guard on the train. And if you look at the last 10 major incidents that happened, safety incidents, 7 out of 10 happened where there was no guard. Right. Now, if you take on into percentage, only 30% of a network have absolutely no guards, and 7 out of 10 incidents happened in the places where they don't have any guards. I think that proves the case, really, that there is a really strong safety case for retaining the guard. And so that's not to say
what's
that
the way forward?
Yeah,
what's the way forward in this? Because clearly there's been these various hiatuses where the government has stood back in the view of Mick Lynch and not helped. That seems to have changed now, and we've got the Transport Secretary as a facilitator, it seems. But is there really a lack of faith on both sides at the moment?
Well, look, I think there has been a change in attitude with the government, but it's difficult to see what the government want. You've already had a report on there about stagflation, which is the lack of growth or actually a recession in the economy plus high inflation. Now, a way to get around that stagflation is to give people decent pay rises, because pay rises aren't actually driving inflation in this instance. It's the oil prices, the profiteering, the scalping, which is making excessive profits. That's driving inflation. So it's not a case that driving down wages is going to help the inflationary rate, because that's not what's actually doing them. And what we do have is an old-fashioned crisis of overproduction, where you're going to have people that won't have the money, because people won't be able to buy Christmas presents, for example, this year, in the way they usually buy them, because they're paying their mortgage and they're paying their heating bills and their energy bills. So the way out of inflation is to give people inflation pay rises.
But can I put the point to you that there are many, many people in the service industries, particularly in hotel, bars, catering and so on this Christmas, who say they are going to have their take-home pay directly affected by this industrial action. I think the hospitality sector basically say 1.5 billion is being taken out of that part of the economy by these strikes. I mean, do you acknowledge that even though you're trying, obviously, the RMT is trying to help its members, it is actually directly hitting others who aren't in such a strong union position?
Well, I accept it's going to have a big knock-on effect to the economy. And if you were a government minister, the maths are simple, isn't it? If it's going to cost 1.5 billion to the economy every time someone goes on strike, and this dispute could be settled for a fraction of that, you would take option B and settle the dispute for a fraction of that. I mean, that's sound economics, but what we have, unfortunately, is an ideology, a free market liberal ideology, complete monetarism. They don't take into account any of our economic theories whatsoever, and their main attack is inflation. But inflation is not being driven by wages; it's been driven by other factors.
Steve Headley, former Senior Assistant General Secretary at the RMT, thanks for your time. And, of course, we'll see what talks come up with this afternoon, RMT and Network Rail, as we said. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Now, the Labour Party's unveiled a list of recommendations to change, it says, Britain's political system, including replacing the House of Lords, banning most MPs from having a second job and moving at least 50,000 civil servants out of the capital. Sir Keir Starmer saying he wants to see what he describes as the biggest ever transfer of power, from Westminster to the British people. Well, joining us now from Leeds, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. And Darren, of course, leads no accident as to where this is being announced. I think they're also on their way up to Edinburgh to speak more a little bit later. Is this their version of levelling up?
I think in some ways it is. That's what they'd like, at least, Mark, intellectually to argue is behind all of this. Fascinating, though, this morning to see the former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, on stage behind me alongside Keir Starmer. As you say, both men on the way up to Edinburgh to talk about Scottish independence a little later on today. But you're right, in terms of the reasoning behind this big announcement, these big constitutional changes, at a time, frankly, where many people say, why are you focusing on things like the House of Lords and civil service jobs during a cost of living crisis? Well, Labour's answer to that is it's all very well talking about the Northern Powerhouse or levelling up, about trying to tackle inequality and grow the economy. Their argument is that many of these decisions need to be more made locally rather than simply in Westminster, because ultimately that will lead to better decisions being made. At least that's the thought process. A 155-page report written essentially by Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, over the past 2 years. Pretty wide-ranging. It looks at everything from devolving more powers to the different local authorities, the city mayors around the UK, the devolved governments, as well as you talked about 50,000 civil service jobs moving outside of London, MPs not being allowed to hold second jobs, and then the kind of eye-catching initiative, if you like, abolishing the House of Lords altogether, making it directly elected. Now, a few things about that. First of all, governments of all hues have promised massive constitutional change in the past, including with the House of Lords. Now, Blair did a bit of it, but often it is more talk than action. It turns out that when you get into government, these things are a hell of a lot more difficult than they seem in opposition. And second of all, when you kind of boil down to some of these issues about second jobs, one person asked a question of Keir Starmer saying, well, why do you not ban second jobs within the Labour Party as it is? Upwards of 80 already have second jobs right now. No real clear answer on all of that. But Labour at least trying to present some policy in an area, frankly, that to date they haven't really had a concrete policy. The big question, of course, is this really a priority? Is it going to be eye-catching? Is it frankly going to win any votes? Probably not. But for Labour, could this, if they get into government, actually change some of the big fundamentals of this country? It really could. And to be fair to both Keir Starmer and Gordon Brown, they seem pretty serious about it today. We'll just have to wait and see that when all those big decisions have to be made in government, if they do manage to get in power, as always, constitutional form tends to slip down the political agenda pretty quickly, Mark.
Yeah, and looking at the timetable as quickly as possible, hope to deliver within 5 years of governing. I mean, it's obviously all a bit pie in the sky in terms of when it might happen. But just looking at the drive to sort of move things outside Westminster, Gordon Brown saying the report identifies 288 new economic areas outside London, which will be perhaps a surprise to many people in the region as to where they might be.
Yeah, indeed, and also when it gets to a point of 288 areas, I mean, you're talking about, frankly, half the country there, aren't you, really? Depending on how big these areas are. I mean, you know, it gets to the point where I think Liz Truss was talking about these kind of different parts of the country, free ports in so many places that, frankly, you were making half the UK untaxable. You're right in saying, you know, as always, with some of the detail on all of this, it is not terribly clear. By the way, this is merely a report that's now going to go out for consultation. It is not proper Labour Party policy at the moment, so do take lots of it, as you say, with a pinch of salt, though I think given the fact they've made a big song and dance about it today, lots of it will probably end up in the manifesto, and Keir Starmer making clear that on principle the Labour Party is committed to abolishing, for example, the House of Lords. But yeah, ultimately, as always with these things, you know, it's very easy to talk about them, it's very difficult sometimes to implement them. There will clearly be opposition, and there'll be opposition, I think, most notably to the abolition of the House of Lords, in the sense that, do we want still yet more elected politicians? I mean, frankly, who will be second-rate politicians, because, you know, the House of Commons will still remain the most important chamber in the changes to the Constitution that Labour want to make. And second of all, you know, that loss of potential expertise that, you know, yes, there were lots of people in the House of Lords who may be there simply because they give or provided some favours to prime ministers in the past, but there are also a lot of people who've done pretty serious stuff and have had pretty big jobs and do bring an awful lot of weight of experience that might be missing in this new chamber. So we'll have to see how this plays out. And as you've rightly pointed out, there's a lot of detail to pin down, even in a 155-page report. But, as I say, they did seem pretty serious about it on stage. We'll see what ultimately ends up in that manifesto.
Darren, thank you for that. We'll let you get back to page 854 just before you finish the report's reading. Thank you very much indeed. Well, on this particular topic, what's being hailed as the biggest step possible in levelling up the Midlands has been launched in Birmingham today. Midlands Connect has submitted plans to improve its rail services, including £1.5 billion in new and improved infrastructure. Other measures include cutting journey times between Birmingham and Hereford by up to 13 minutes, plans to improve access to high-speed services, such as the HS2 at Birmingham's Curzon Street. Let's head to Birmingham now and join our West Midlands reporter there, Jack Carson. And Jack, have these been outlined as something that will happen, or again, like the Labour plans we heard, hopes for the future?
So this is the second, so there has to be 3 business cases that are put forward to the government for this all to be approved. This is the second one, but they have put forward plans for this £1.5 billion package to the Department for Transport. They've put it forward to the government. It's up to them to approve it before it then obviously goes to the Treasury, where we're expecting an announcement in the spring as to whether this is going to get the funding to go ahead. If it does, it's 2025 to 2030 when all this infrastructure and plans are going to take place. And like you said, it's a £1.5 billion package, and it's some serious infrastructure building as well to improve rail services from Wales to West Midlands, and from the East Midlands to the West Midlands.
And of course, the whole issue being that the HS2 plans have come in for some criticism, particularly a lot of Tory backbenchers uneasy about the cost. And I suppose the fear is that £1.5 billion becomes a rather bigger bill by the time it gets into action.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well, a big part of this whole plan and this whole Midlands plan, it's called the Growing for Growth Midlands Railway Hub plan. A massive part of this is HS2, because essentially it's moving a lot of local kind of Midlands services to go to Moore Street instead of arrive in New Street Station, which is meant to clear up the bottleneck of trains there. But the idea is it was described to me by someone at Midlands Connect as creating a new kind of King's Cross St Pancras in Birmingham by having loads of local trains go into Moore Street for people then to be able to walk round the corner into the Curzon Street Station in HS2 and use those services to go to, say, Manchester or London. So it's not just about levelling up. Of course, this was in the Conservative manifesto back in 2019 to invest in this Midlands Railway hub, but HS2 is still a big part of this plan if it is to be successful in the long run.
Jack at Curzon Street, thanks very much indeed for updating us on that bit of levelling up if it happens, of course. Thank you very much indeed. You're watching GB News Live. Coming up, those Strep A cases on the rise. At least 6 children confirmed to have died from the infection. What should the doctors be telling us? We'll be hearing from an expert in contagious diseases. First, we'll take a short break.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, families and doctors are being warned to be wary of the symptoms of Strep A after 6 children died from the infection. 4-year-old Camilla Rose Burns is still fighting for her life on a ventilator in Liverpool. And parents across the country are becoming increasingly concerned. Well, joining us now is Dr. Bharat Pankhania, who's Senior Clinical Lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School and a former public health consultant in communicable diseases. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I gather GPs are now being urged to maybe reassess the threshold for actually giving antibiotics, because I guess at this time of year, lots of children present with coughs and colds which are viral and therefore aren't really treatable by antibiotics.
You're absolutely right. And this is something I was mentioning last week, whereby I was saying, as it is, as you correctly say, very difficult to distinguish between, is this a viral throat, is this a bacterial? But nevertheless, penicillin works really well against group A streptococcal infections. And maybe this year is the time to reduce your threshold for considering giving antibiotics if you have patients with those signs and symptoms and complaints.
So do you think the NHS should put an alert out to all GPs saying, look, just be safe rather than sorry and actually administer antibiotics, even though I know there's obviously a concern that they have been overused and therefore many bacteria become resistant to antibiotics?
You're again spot on, and that alert has already been sent out. It was sent out on the 2nd of December. We have something called a central alerting system. Wherever there are new developments or new urgent messages, these alerts go out. And I read that alert, and it clearly identifies that GPs and secondary care health workers reduce their threshold for prescribing antibiotics in cases like people presenting with that sore throat, and you're not able to distinguish, is it a viral or bacterial infection?
Yeah. And I guess for many parents watching and listening, they'll be thinking, right, what should I be looking out for? Because clearly, you know, a strep throat, a sore throat is quite a common occurrence. What happens to make it become more serious and put your child's life in danger?
So let's first, for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, explain what are the pertinent signs and symptoms of a strep A throat. So it goes like this. You have a high temperature, you're unwell, your whole body is aching. Number 2, you have extremely painful lymph gland nodes here in the neck. Number 3, your tonsils may look red, raw and angry. They may have an exudate. The roof of your mouth may also be red, raw and may have a few white patches. Third, fourth, you may have a tongue that is red, raw, and often looks like a strawberry. And then one more thing, you have a rash that starts in the groin, goes up the trunk, down your arms, and it looks like sandpaper, feels like sandpaper. So if you have 1, 2, or 3 of those signs, it is highly indicative of a strep infection. You should talk to your doctor and take those antibiotics.
And how quickly do those symptoms actually develop, particularly the rash, which is obviously very often the warning sign?
Well, unfortunately, these signs and symptoms can develop very, very quickly.
Right.
So that watchfulness is very important. You just don't sit on it. So these are young children, remember. So things happen very, very quickly. So again, my other piece of advice is don't sit on it. You know, if you think this is happening, then call your doctor, act fast, act early, rather than saying, let's see what happens.
Yeah. OK. Now, what is your view about the suggestion that many of the kids could have lost their natural immunity because of lockdown, that quite often their bodies can fight off these things in normal circumstances?
Well, let me put this myth to bed if I can.
Yeah.
And look, the real things are real, common things are common, and we should be sensible about these things. So in 2022, we're out and about. We are not taking infection control measures like we did in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And we're mingling with people. And then we've got viruses out in circulation. That's COVID. We've got influenza out in circulation. And then we've got this strep in circulation too. So all those common reasons are the reasons why we are seeing this upsurge in number of cases, rather than our immunity has been weakened because of isolation. Put that to bed. There is no evidence that the immunity has been weakened because of isolation.
Got it. OK. But as you said, the watchword is keep an eye on the kids. And if you really are starting to worry about temperature and rashes, get hold of medical assistance as soon as possible.
Absolutely right, yes.
Dr. Bharat Pankania, thank you very much indeed for joining us from the University of Exeter. Much appreciated. Good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And, of course, we'll continue to monitor that situation and keep you updated on all the medical advice that comes up. Coming up after the break, the CBI warning the UK economy will shrink, yes, next year, and petrol prices might spike again. More coming up with Liam, our business editor. And some good news from the World Cup as England reach the quarter-finals. We'll be crossing to Doha to soak up the mood, and a few other things maybe as well. First, though, a news update with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 12:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Police Scotland have been dealing with an incident at Glasgow Airport. An area's been cordoned off and a bomb disposal unit was called to the site after a suspicious item was reported. As a precautionary measure this morning, the check-in section and security hall were evacuated. Passengers were sent to wait outside at a multi-storey car park. Police have been alerted to the incident just before 6 a.m. Of course, this is a developing story. We'll bring you more as we get more information. Labour says it will look at abolishing the House of Lords if it wins the next general election. They've described the current system as indefensible. Sir Keir Starmer set out his blueprint for a new Britain, promising the biggest ever transfer of power from Westminster to nations and regions if his party's elected. Launching a report which was led by the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, Sir Keir Starmer promised to overhaul the way the country's governed. The UK's biggest business group says there'll be a decade of lost economic growth in Britain if action isn't taken by the government. The CBI says it's likely the country's already in recession, with rocketing inflation, negative growth and falling productivity. The Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, says the RMT's decision to reject an improved pay offer is incredibly disappointing and unfair to the public. They were offered a pay rise of 8% and a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies before April 2024. But the UK's biggest rail union says the deal wouldn't protect its members and would lead to unsafe practices. England forward Raheem Sterling's flown back to the UK after a burglary at his home. Surrey police say watches and jewellery were stolen, but confirmed his family weren't in the house at the time of the robbery. England manager Gareth Southgate was unable to say whether the footballer would return to Qatar for the rest of the World Cup. We're on your TV, online and your DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark will be back in a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, the CBI, Confederation of British Industry, says UK's economy will shrink next year, GDP or growth falling by 0.4%. That's a recession. Meanwhile, the government launching a review to prevent small firms being ripped off by larger companies. And then this morning, oil prices going back up. They've risen about 2%, which could see petrol and diesel prices back on the increase in the days ahead. To make sense of all that's happening, as ever, here's our economic and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. You've got a long list. Time starts now.
Yeah, so the Confederation of British Industry, Mark, viewers and listeners will have heard of them. They are a sort of bosses lobby group. They represent about 190,000 businesses. When they make some economic forecasts,
pay attention.
Governments pin back their ears, and they're basically testing the mood as well among their members. And what they're saying is here, I've got a graphic for GB News viewers on television. So GDP growth, that's the size of the economy in the UK. It grew by 4.2% this year. That's what we think it's going to be. But by 2023, it's going to shrink to minus 0.4%, which is obviously a recession, as you say. Unemployment, that's going to go up from 3.6% now to 5% next year, which is still quite low by historic standards, but increasingly painful. Inflation, though, here's some good news. According to the CBI, down from 11.1% where it currently is this year to 6.5% next year. It's worth saying, though, Mark, so the CBI is saying that the economy will shrink next year. Only in June, so less than 6 months ago, it was saying that the economy would expand by 1% next year. And there's a sense that businesses are on go slow. There's a lot of supply chain issues from the lockdown that are still knocking around. The global economy hasn't really rebooted. And here's the thing, a lot of businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises and the bigger businesses, because of the political instability, because of all the change of government and so on, because of the uncertain business outlook as interest rates rise around the world, they're putting investment on hold. They're not making those investments. They're not building those new factories in the main. Of course, some are. And that's what's going to slow growth down so much that the economy actually contracts next year, according to the CBI.
And this is why they've used that phrase that we remember from the 1970s, stagflation, a stagnant economy, but inflation, the worst of both worlds. So the CBI, and I guess they've spoken to lots of their members out there, saying a year-long decline in consumer spending. So I guess even if inflation comes back a bit and interest rates come back a bit, the picture is going to be pretty grim for the whole of next year.
Well, things can change quite quickly, but that's certainly the prognosis now. For me, a lot of it depends on the war in Ukraine, what happens to oil prices, and we'll come on to them, Mark, because I just wanted to quickly tell you about a review that the government's launched this morning. Well, it was revealed over the weekend. It was officially launched this morning. Grant Shapps, Business Secretary, he says he doesn't want big businesses to be ripping off small businesses when it comes to late payment. The government estimates that small businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises up to 250 employees, they're owed about £23 billion in unpaid invoices. Now, this often happens when inflation goes up. If I'm a big business, you're a small business, I owe you £100, OK? I'm going to delay paying you if I'm unscrupulous, because by the time you get the £100 until it's going to be worth a lot less. And that is the issue. The trouble that Grant Shapps has got, though, is that one of the biggest entities that's guilty of late payment in the country is the government itself. It contracts with lots of businesses, so the government has to put its own house in order. But many people listening to this, whether you run a business off your kitchen table, whether you're on a regional business, SME business leaders, late payment is often the bane of their lives.
And cash flow means whether you stay
king,
afloat
whether you can survive or not. Absolutely.
Exactly. Now, the other aspect, and you wrote about this at the weekend in the Telegraph, is about oil prices and what happens in terms of the effect on the economy. We've seen a little bit of a fall at the forecourt, for instance, in recent weeks, but 159 some people are doing for unleaded, but starting to creep back up again today, just in time for Christmas.
Just in time for Christmas. Now, because the world economy is slowing, because interest rates are going up, particularly in the US, UK, Western Europe, that means less demand for oil around the world, which would mean ordinarily, Mark, oil prices would fall. And they have fallen from about $100 a barrel over the summer to around $80 a barrel until quite recently. But OPEC, the exporters cartel, plus, they call it OPEC plus now because OPEC working with Russia, the Saudis, a lot of the Middle Eastern economies, they're not pushing the Russians away because of the war in Ukraine. They're saying to the Western world, no, we quite like working with the Russians, actually. They are restricting supply. And that has led to prices not going down as much as they would, given that the world economy's falling. Now, what's happening now, and it's kicked in today, is that EU and indeed G7 Western world sanctions on Russian oil have now begun. And believe it or not, what we are trying to do is we're trying to cap the price at which Russia sells its oil around the world.
It's what, $60
a barrel? $60 a barrel, which is much lower than where the market is, OK? How can we do that? Well, the EU and the UK in particular, between us, our companies control 90% of the insurance of freight around the world. You know, UK shipping
it
insurance.
Around the place, yeah.
And what we're saying, our companies, with the heavy-handed government on their shoulder, are saying, we're not going to let companies transport, we're not going to insure freight ships transporting Russian oil unless the Russians sell it back to us at $60 a barrel. So G7 leaders, Biden, Macron, Rishi Sunak, they want to keep Russian oil moving, to keep the world economy moving, but they want to try and control the price.
And penalise the Russians
Now,
at
of course,
the same time,
Russians think this is outrageous. A lot of the OPEC countries think this is outrageous, a massive extension, potentially, of Western power. And that's why there are concerns in the market this morning that these sanctions could backfire and could lead to even more production restrictions by OPEC. And that's why we're seeing the oil price spike up about $2 or $3 this morning alone.
Up like a rocket, down like a feather.
Indeed.
As ever, thank you for that. And we'll see what happens in that market, of course, in the coming days. So, tough times ahead for the UK economy, but at least we're doing well in the footy. For now, maybe. England into the quarter-finals after defeating Senegal yesterday, going up against France on Saturday in what will be a nail-biting quarter-final. Well, let's bring you into the skyline of Doha with the warmth there and the skies clear. England fans been revelling in the victory. Reports of it's coming home, chants echoing across the city. And if you listen carefully, you might be able to hear it in the distance. Well, if not, let's get Chris Scudder to actually sing us a little refrain. Chris joining us there, I think in the suit. Is that Chris?
If you want, Mark.
Yeah, there we go. Now, you won't mind us saying that you're a veteran of World Cups and, of course, Euros over the years. How are you actually assessing the mood there after this move into the quarterfinals?
Well, Mark, first of all, it's the most unusual. This is my 8th World Cup in a row. It's the most unusual I've ever done because never before has everyone been plonked in the same place. Normally, you have the kind of travel jeopardy, and always, you know, England, they never win the group, so they end up changing their route. And you look at Russia, and they have to go 1,000 miles into a different city, and that's all part of the fun. So here, well, they have won the group this time. So you know, it's a bit different. Everyone's here, and as you can probably see behind me now, you've got all kinds of nationalities. South Korean flag behind me. You've got Brazil playing South Korea later on in a couple of hours. We've got Japan playing Croatia. Two of the nations there, Japan and South Korea, who we didn't really expect to perhaps to be at this stage, but the tournament's all the better for it. So it's been a really strange World Cup, really unique. It's had its problems, we all know that, not just the political ones, but it's been a bit of a kind of controlling exercise by the Qataris. So it's, you know, it's an acquired taste really, but the fact that everyone's here, it is a giant party, particularly here in the market.
Yeah.
And as kick-off approaches in a couple of hours, it's going to be a bit of a crazy place. It always is, as everyone seems to want to gather here.
And can we ask you, are the England fans enjoying a little bit more now, given that result? Because, I mean, as you say, there were reports about, you know, the beer tents being moved, the fact that the accommodation, there was no air conditioning and so on. But are they a bit happier out there now?
Just caught the end of that, Mark. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, it's not that warm now, to be honest. I mean, it's kind of, you know, mid-20s, and by the evening, and I was at the stadium the other night for the USA game against the Netherlands, and I was quite chilly. You know, you have these warm evenings, and then you've got this cold air blasting down your neck, so you want to put a jumper on, really. On the field, absolutely fine, really. It's not too hot for the players at all. I'm sure they're enjoying it, really. Playing in a sort of balmy temperatures in what would normally be the middle of the English midwinter season, with cold and wet, rainy days in London, Manchester, Liverpool, all the rest of it. So yeah, it's, you know, we always said that England players are always exhausted. I was going to say another word a minute ago, but you know, end of the season. But this is mid-season, so English players are in their prime now, their fittest. So maybe that's what we're seeing, because, you know, we saw the great young lad coming through, Jude Bellingham. He's run more than anybody, 19 years old. You would at that age anyway. So, you know, maybe this is going to be the golden time for England. I go back 20 years, Mark, when, do you remember Greg Dyke, then the FA chairman, said, why are we so bad at football? Let's set a date on this. When can we start competing with the elite teams? Because we should be doing that, and we should. And he said Qatar 22, and we all laughed. I thought, oh yeah, George's Park and the investment in the young players. That's now bearing fruit without a doubt. Phil Foden, all those young players, Rashford, Bellingham, all those kids coming through, and here we are 20 years later with the best crop, the best squad in depth we've had for decades probably, and the bench is so strong that all the other nations, I'm telling you, are looking at it and thinking, we don't really want to be playing England right now. France will be doing that at the weekend. They're the world champions, we know that. But it's going to be one hell of a battle, trust me, and the build-up's going to be fantastic.
OK, but let's just pour a bit of cold water on it just for the moment, bearing in mind that sort of first half hour where they were stuttering a bit. Senegal could have put two past us. France would do that if we basically don't put our foot on the gas from the very start.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, really. as far as the defending thing, what I'm sure everybody who's sitting at home watching this now, the England fans thinking, oh, what a chance we have to do really well in this World Cup. The criticism of Gareth Southgate, the last two tournaments, which England could and maybe should have won. I mean, certainly the Euros at Wembley, and then the semi-final of the World Cup against Croatia, when they took the lead in both those games and then sat back. And all the noise around this tournament and the build-up has been he's too negative, and the knives were out ready. You know, he's going to be sticking around, but he's not gone for that. This time he's decided play 4 at the back, not 5, and use England's strength, which is attacking. Be offensive, and it's paid off so far. They've scored 12 goals. I doubt whether he'll change his mind, but that may make it a real thrill ride against France, because they've got some great attackers. We know Brazil have, Argentina, Messi, all the rest of it. So we might get some high-scoring games, but I think people would settle for that, wouldn't they? Go for it, not sit back and wait for the inevitable defeat. Be adventurous, be attacking, use your strengths, and let's see where it takes us.
Sounds as if you might have to write a new chapter for your book on that World Cup history. Chris, for the moment, thanks for updating us out there in Doha. We'll speak to you later. Thank you very much indeed. Now, within the past hour, a new trailer for Harry and Meghan's Netflix documentary has been released, with the revelation that the first episode will be viewable this Thursday. And it includes claims that the couple and those around them, the so-called hatred directed at Meghan and her race. Let's have a look and listen to this clip.
There's a hierarchy of the family. You know, there's leaking, but there's also planting of stories. There was a war against Meghan to suit other people's agendas.
It's about hatred. It's about race. It's a dirty game. The pain and suffering of women marrying into this institution, this feeding frenzy.
I realized they're never going to protect you.
I was terrified. I didn't want history to repeat itself. No one knows the full truth.
Are we about to find the full truth? Joining us, our royal reporter Cameron Walker. Apologies, actually, by the way, about all those camera flashes going off. We should have warned you about that. But the royal family were bracing themselves for this, and perhaps with reason. Royal life is a dirty game. Experiences about hatred, about race. It's not what they wanted, is it?
No, definitely not. It's clear that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex still have grievances, I think, to air in public with the royal family, or at least the courtiers within Buckingham Palace, but also clearly the press. I think a couple of takeaways just from watching that clip there. The first is Prince Harry said there is a hierarchy of the family. There is leaking, there is planting of stories. Clearly that is alleging that people within inside the institution have an agenda against Harry and Meghan and are leaking negative stories about them to the press. So that's the first point.
Right.
The second point being, Prince Harry says the pain and suffering of women marrying into the institution, this feeding frenzy. There were pictures there of Princess Diana, his mother, hounded by the press, of course, and then, of course, Princess Diana died in 1997. He is making the comparison there to the alleged treatment of Princess Diana to the alleged treatment of Meghan Markle.
Indeed, and therein lies the main question. Is this just a continuation of this issue I mean, William's dealt with it in a different way. The whole issue about the death of Princess Diana, the paparazzi, the hounding, as they called it, and that is still unresolved for him.
Yeah, I think he's clearly been very affected by his death, and I think we're going to get a lot more details about exactly how he felt, A, from this documentary, but B, from his memoir, which is going to be released on January 10th, because the blurb very much spoke of him walking behind his mother's coffin in 1997 as a boy. But I think a lot of people are questioning, what else is there to say?
Yeah.
In the Mail on Sunday over the weekend, a source told that paper that the King and the Queen Consort are not worried about what's in this Netflix documentary. They are wearied. They're tired of the complaints that Harry and Meghan continue to pursue.
And therein lies another interesting question. If it is the same issue, the same story that's being put through the documentary and the book, will the public tire of it? Will they not switch on? Will they not buy the book? Because clearly there is a commercial concern for the couple here. They've been paid an enormous amount of money to put these things out.
Exactly. They're no longer working members of the royal family. They don't receive any money from a sovereign grant. That's our money, taxpayers' money. They're also not receiving any money from King Charles, from a Duchy of Lancaster, his private income there. So they have to make money some way. So that is why we have this book deal. That is why we have this Netflix documentary, this and Meghan's Spotify deal with Archetypes. The problem is, it seems to be becoming apparent, according to some people, that the only thing they've got to sell is their link to the royal family. And some people, I think, perhaps are growing tired of their...
Right. Very, very quickly, you've just come back from Boston. You were there with the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Yes.
What are they likely to make of this? I mean, again, are they just wearied by this?
From Kensington Palace's perspective, they're ignoring it. They're going to be keeping calm and carrying it on, as it were, but it wouldn't surprise me that if there is a particular allegation against the Prince and Princess of Wales, they will fight back.
Yes, pushback was the phrase I saw. Do you think that might happen?
On Daily Express, I think so. The Queen set a precedent after the Oprah interview. She released that famous statement, recollections may vary. We could see the same again.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll wait the maybe third clip, if that's issued. Cameron, as ever, updating us on that. Plus, coming up, the weather warning, -6 on the way. Let's get some more details and get a full weather forecast now.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's cold out there and it's going to turn even colder this week. But for today, it's cloudy for many. Some showers around, similar locations to the last couple of days. Those showers coming in on an easterly breeze affecting mainly southeast Scotland into eastern England, some making their way into the Midlands and parts of Wales, as well as parts of Northern Ireland, one or two running along the south coast. Otherwise, the further west you are, the drier and brighter it will be. The best of the sunshine western Scotland, but wherever you are, it's going to be feeling cold. 4 to 8 degrees. When you add on that easterly breeze, it's going to feel more like 2 or 3 Celsius. Into the evening, the showers continue for a time. They're going to push through parts of central England into Wales. They're going to tend to disappear from Northern Ireland as well as the south coast. The winds turn more to a northerly across Scotland. They'll bring showers increasingly into the north of Scotland, and those showers will turn sleety by the end of the night. But it's a cold night everywhere. Temperatures in the low single figures or just below freezing in some spots. Then, later Tuesday, a change on the way. We lose the easterly and we gain a northerly, which is even colder at the moment. That northerly coming straight from the Arctic, and that's the weather we've got for the rest of the week. So it's going to turn progressively colder after a chilly start on Tuesday. For many places, we'll start to lose the cloud, actually. The cloud's being brought in by the easterly, so brighter skies for many, especially towards the west and later on the south. But across northern Scotland and eastern England, we'll see showers increasingly develop, and those showers will be turning increasingly to sleet and snow for the far north of Scotland. That's where it's going to feel coldest, especially as the wind picks up later in the day. But in the south, with lighter winds, well, it's not going to feel too pleasant with some sunshine, I think. Temperatures still a little below average, mid to high single figures. Into Tuesday night, and the snow increasingly affecting the north of Scotland. And for Wednesday, that snow's really going to build up at 2 to 5 centimetres at lower levels, 10 to 20 over the hills. It's going to feel cold everywhere.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
You're with GB News Live this lunchtime. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up today, More crisis talks to avert the rail strikes that could clobber Christmas after the RMT union rejects the latest pay offer. And it comes amid warnings that industrial action could cost Britain's bars and restaurants £1.5 billion in lost trade. Labour says it wants to radically reform Britain by moving jobs outside London, abolishing the House of Lords and banning MPs from having second jobs. We'll be taking a look at all the details. Doctors and parents being warned to be vigilant for the symptoms of Strep A after at least 6 children die from the infection. How serious is the outbreak? What are the signs we should be looking for? England through to the World Cup quarter-finals, but has their victory over Senegal changed the mood amongst the fans in Qatar? And the latest royal bombshell dropped by Harry and Meghan with their new Netflix trailer. It's all about race and it's all about hatred, they say. What do you say? Tell us your thoughts. As ever, email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk and we'll update you with all of those coming up. But now the latest news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 1:02. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Labour says it will look at abolishing the House of Lords if it wins the next general election, describing the current system as indefensible. Sir Keir Starmer set out his blueprint for a new Britain. He's promising the biggest ever transfer of power from Westminster to nations and regions if his party comes into power. Launching a report which was led by the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, he promised to overhaul the way the country's governed. The UK's biggest business group says there'll be a decade of lost economic growth in Britain if action isn't taken by the government. The CBI says it's likely the country's already in recession, with rocketing inflation, negative growth and falling productivity. The group say stagflation, a combination of stagnation and rising prices, is preventing firms from investing. The Transport Secretary Mark Harper says the RMT's decision to reject an improved pay offer is incredibly disappointing and unfair to the public. A pay rise of 8% and a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies before April 2024 had been tabled. But the UK's biggest rail union said that deal wouldn't protect its members and would lead to unsafe practices. Therefore, the strike action's due to go ahead for 4 days later this month. Meanwhile, 33,000 members of the Fire Brigades Union will vote today if they should walk out following a 5% pay offer. The FBU say striking is the last resort, but that many, they say, are desperate, with some struggling to afford to live. Firefighter and trade unionist Paul Embry says they've been left with no option.
We're being asked to take another significant real terms pay cut, and at a time when firefighters, like everybody else across the country, are really struggling to make ends meet. I've been a firefighter for 25 years, and this is the first time really that I've had colleagues say to me they can't afford to buy their kids Christmas presents. They're struggling to pay their mortgage bills, their energy bills, etc. So it's a decision that none of us want to take, but when you consider the paltry pay offer that's been tabled, we've really been left with no other option, frankly.
The government set out plans to overhaul NHS pension rules in an attempt to retain more senior doctors. The proposals would allow staff to claim their pension benefits but continue working and contribute to their pension. They'd also proposed to remove barriers to retired clinicians returning to work. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the move will help to open up extra GP appointments. England forward Raheem Sterling's flown back to the UK after his home was broken into. Surrey Police says watches and jewellery were stolen, but confirmed the Chelsea winger's family weren't in the house at the time of the robbery. Manager of England, Gareth Southgate, says family is the most important thing and couldn't say whether the player will return to Qatar for the rest of the World Cup when England faces France. Netflix confirmed its Harry and Meghan docuseries will make its debut this week, with the first episode available on Thursday. Releasing a second trailer, the streaming giant said there'll be 6 episodes, with the second volume out next week.
There's a hierarchy of the family. You know, there's leaking, but there's also planting of stories.
There was a war against Meghan to suit other people's agendas.
It's about hatred. It's about race. It's a dirty game. The pain and suffering of women marrying into this institution, this feeding frenzy.
I realized they're never going to protect you.
I was terrified. I didn't want history to repeat itself.
You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now back to Mark.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed. So, hundreds of troops now being put on standby to cover for striking workers as ministers prepare for a wave of industrial action across public services in the run-up to Christmas. More talks are expected this afternoon between Network Rail and the RMT, but the rail union has rejected the latest offer from the train companies, and now 33,000 firefighters are being balloted on a strike over pay. Well, joining us now, Nick Chaffee, the Southern Region Organiser for the Socialist Party. Nick, does it seem that it's shaping up for a showdown between all the unions and the government?
Well, we certainly feel that the most effective way for the trade unions to pressure the government is to stand together, coordinate the action and ensure that these pay issues are settled quickly.
But that's the problem. They're not being settled quickly, are they? And there are many people who aren't members of a big union, for instance, those who work in hospitality, the bars and restaurants, where that part of the economy is going to take a £1.5 billion hit, they think.
Well, Unite Hospitality is organising very effectively now, and we'd encourage people in that sector to join Unite, get organised in the trade unions and be part of that fight back.
And what if they don't want to be a union member and basically just want to be able to get decent pay without taking industrial action? Is that an option for them?
Well, they're not going to get it from this government, that's for sure. And I think, you know, all the worrying signs at the moment for everyone is that their bills are going up and they're finding it hard to cope. And in our view, the only way to fight back is to join the trade unions. It's shown Unite currently have had something in the region of 400 disputes, 80% of them they claim they've won. We've seen important victories for different sectors of the workforce, the Liverpool dockers most recently. So I think clearly the lesson of the last few months is definitely to join a union and to strike where necessary to ensure that workers are not plunged into poverty by this cost of living crisis.
Yeah, the key phrase you used there, where necessary. And of course, I think it's probably fair to say the rail unions, for instance, have enjoyed public support so far in terms of their pay situation. But that may start to evaporate as we head up to Christmas, where people can't get to office parties, they can't go shopping. Lots of them maybe aren't members of unions representing them when they can't get big pay rises.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think the pandemic demonstrated that key workers were recognised as keeping the country going. Rail workers were at the forefront of doing that. And I think most workers, we did that. We stuck to our tasks and we now want to be paid fairly for the work that we do. And I think most people would applaud that.
Just looking at the latest economic picture, the CBI is basically saying, look, we've got a year-long decline in consumer spending ahead, talking stagflation, i.e. a stagnant economy with inflation still going on. Given that and what the government has said about, you know, pay rises not being affordable to match the rate of inflation, should there be perhaps a more realistic attitude by some of the unions?
Well, it's shocking, really, isn't it, to consider that this is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And we're saying that many workers who have a full-time job have to use food banks. You know, what we have to say clearly is that pay rises, inflation-proof pay rises, are not inflationary if they're paid out of the profits, the massive profits that these companies are making, and the huge wealth that exists in British society. The top CEOs of big business in Britain are on £4 million a year. How do they justify this inequality in society and it's low pay that's driving the economy into a recession because workers can't buy? No one can go to a shop, Christmas shopping this year is going to be tough for most families because of this cost squeeze. So this is capitalism in crisis. There's not a lack of wealth in society. There's not a lack of need for public services, for housing and so on. This is a system in crisis. And as socialists, we are...
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but just on your point about the big business, I mean, the Fire Brigades Union, that's not basically a commercial operation. It's not a big business making lots of profit. That money has to come out of the public purse. paid for by the taxpayer, who, is obviously hurting at the moment. They've been offered 5%, and they call that derisory. I mean, there may be some people in other sectors thinking, well, actually 5% at the moment, even though it's half the rate of inflation, it does give me something.
Well, we can't accept that, can we? In terms of public services, corporations in Britain are served by the fire service, and yet they've seen huge tax cuts, not just recently, over decades. And so, yes, the wealth does exist in society, and we say the 1% should be made to pay for that. We're not saying that ordinary people should see increases in taxes as they're currently being hit by the government, increased council tax payments, again, that most people are going to be hurt. Why aren't the 1% paying here? The super rich are getting wealthier. Through the pandemic, the super rich doubled their wealth. It's obscene, and people have had enough. We are not buying this argument that the money isn't there.
But you will know that that many economists pointed out that the cut in the upper limit of 45% on tax, that wouldn't have actually raised that much money. So there's not a huge golden pot available by those at the top of the tree. But the other aspect is, if these inflation-busting pay rises are pushed through, what does that do to inflation itself?
Well, like I said, pay rises are not a cause of inflation. Companies are making huge profits. Those pay rises should be paid out of the profits of those companies. What's inflationary about that?
Basic economic law says if those companies have to pay the higher pay award, they have to charge more, and the whole thing goes round and becomes inflationary.
No, that's the capitalist problem, isn't it? Because they want to protect their profits. That's why they put up prices, because they don't want to take the hit. They want the working class to take the hit. Well, why should we? We're the ones who are producing this wealth. It's not the CEOs that are producing this wealth. If they go on strike, no one would notice.
So can I put it to you then, this is as much about class warfare as it is about getting a decent pay rise then?
Well, we live in a class society. It's clear, isn't it? There's a massive gulf between the tops of society. The middle classes are getting hammered. Let's not forget it was junior doctors that were going on strike. Most recently, barristers that were going on strike. Everyone's being hit by this cost of living, apart from the very richest in society, are all preaching tighten their belts, when they're absolutely hypocritically going out and whining and dining and drinking their champagne as much as ever. And it's not going to continue. That's why this, if you like, pot is boiling, is because people are furious at the inequality in society and being preached at by the super rich that they can't have a pay rise that's going to keep their cost of living up with inflation.
Nick Chaffee, Southern Region Organiser for the Socialist Party, thank you very much indeed for your view. And, of course, we'll see what emerges in terms of the various talks going on. And you may well have a view on what Nick was saying there. Don't forget GBViews at gbnews.uk, and we'll reflect all views on this particular aspect of the winter of discontent. Well, winter has indeed well and truly arrived. Things set to get chillier, we're told. The Met Office issuing a level 3 alert for severe cold in England, warning of a risk to the elderly and vulnerable people, and that's in place from Wednesday evening, expected to last until next Monday, so over next weekend. Well, let's speak to a man who knows all about these various instances of severe weather. John Ketley joining us now from Lincoln. John, thank you very much indeed for your time today. I guess a lot of Met people are trying to read the runes of, has it been called the troll from Trondheim, I think, by some people, this Arctic weather coming down from Norway?
Well, it's probably more accurate than the beast from the east at the moment, Mark, I have to say, because although the winds have been, well, northeasterly for several days, and that's why we've seen the temperatures drop at the end of November into the first early days of December. We've seen those dropping temperatures. There is certainly a chill in the air, but the winds are going to go northerly once we get through tomorrow, and that is a sign of things to come, I have to say.
OK.
Now, it is a winter of discontent, we know, politically. And, of course, it is memories of 1978-79, when we also had a similar situation out on the picket line, but also weather-wise, because it really was very severe weather at that time. And although I think we've got some pretty severe weather coming up in the next week, we can't really say it's going to go much beyond that. Although, having said that, of course, it is the weather, and it doesn't take too much to upset the butterfly wings.
Yeah.
And we get into a chaotic situation once again.
Indeed, and people always say, oh, they're always warning about these things, and it never is quite as bad. However, have we been softened up because we've had such a warm, mild autumn?
Well, indeed we have. I think it has been the mildest, hasn't it, for since 1884, records going back to 1884 for the 3 months of autumn. So it has been exceptionally mild. November tailed off at the end. It was extremely mild for a long time. It did get a bit chillier later on, so it wasn't the mildest November. I think that was 1994. But nonetheless, yes, we do get a bit soft, don't we? I think it is a time now for putting on the extra layers. But of course, these are harsh times, and we're having to pay big energy bills as well. So we don't want to put the heating on too much. But I think, as far as this week's concerned, certainly it is going to be so chilly that we need to try and help ourselves. It is going to be extremely cold, especially at night. I mean, daytime temperatures are going down to about 2 or 3 degrees through the week as an absolute maximum for many parts of the country. And at night, we're going to have some severe frosts, and those hard frosts will occur when you've got some snow already lying on the ground. Well, the snow at the moment is mainly on the Grampians, but it is set to get worse during Wednesday across northern Scotland, and then those wintry showers, sleet and snow showers start to feed further south, and there will be a covering of snow in some places, not everywhere by any means, but certainly there will be some snow on the ground. That's when you get your really harsh temperatures at night, so we could be looking at some severe frost, -6 to -8.
OK, and where is that ban going to go to? I mean, how far south could it get? Because clearly, once it reaches London, the newspapers wake up and realise that there's a problem out there.
That's when everybody starts ringing me again. Yes, that's right, marvellous. But I've got my cup of tea here. I'm on champagne at the moment. But no, I think we're going to see a band of snow probably extending out of Scotland for the middle of the week. It's probably going to bring some extensive snowfall across the higher ground, more particularly of the northwest Midlands, northwest England, Lancashire, the high ground of the Pennines, and into Wales as well. Wales could be pretty badly hit from this, and there'll be some snow on the moors of the West Country as well later in the week too. Now, it's just about possible at the moment that we could see a little thread of this snow coming across to the southeast of England, probably in particular during Saturday, I think, at this stage. It's a little bit up in the air at the moment, if you don't mind the pun. But I think we are going to see some snow further south from northern Scotland, where it is going to set in anger during Wednesday.
OK, John, thank you for that. We'll let you get back to your cup of tea, but drink it quickly because we might be back to you in a day or two, I think, looking at that. Cheers. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Nice to talk to you again. Well, coming up, if you weren't excited enough about that first taste of Harry and Meghan's new Netflix series, fear not, another one has emerged. Our royal correspondent has the latest and what it means for the royal family. And as more Strep A deaths ripple across the UK, increasing concerns for families, you'll be hearing the latest from a virologist. But before that, let's get a very detailed weather forecast for you now.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's cold out there and it's going to turn even colder this week. But for today, it's cloudy for many. Some showers around, similar locations to the last couple of days, those showers coming in on an easterly breeze affecting mainly southeast Scotland into eastern England, some making their way into the Midlands and parts of Wales, as well as parts of Northern Ireland, 1 or 2 running along the south coast. Otherwise, the further west you are, the drier and brighter it will be. The best of the sunshine western Scotland, but wherever you are, it's going to be feeling cold. 4 to 8 degrees. When you add on that easterly breeze, it's going to feel more like 2 or 3 Celsius. Into the evening, the showers continue for a time. They're going to push through parts of central England into Wales. They're going to tend to disappear from Northern Ireland as well as the south coast. The winds turn more to a northerly across Scotland. They'll bring showers increasingly into the north of Scotland, and those showers will turn sleety by the end of the night. But it's a cold night everywhere. Temperatures in the low single figures or just below freezing in some spots. Then, later Tuesday, a change on the way. We lose the easterly and we gain a northerly, which is even colder at the moment. That northerly coming straight from the Arctic, and that's the weather we've got for the rest of the week. So it's going to turn progressively colder after a chilly start on Tuesday. For many places, we'll start to lose the cloud, actually. The cloud's being brought in by the easterly, so brighter skies for many, especially towards the west and later on the south. But across northern Scotland and eastern England, we'll see showers increasingly develop, and those showers will be turning increasingly to sleet and snow for the far north of Scotland. That's where it's going to feel coldest, especially as the wind picks up later in the day. But in the south, with lighter winds, well, it's not going to feel too pleasant with some sunshine, I think. Temperatures still a little below average, mid to high single figures. Into Tuesday night, and the snow increasingly affecting the north of Scotland. And for Wednesday, that snow's really going to build up at 2 to 5 centimetres at lower levels, 10 to 20 over the hills. It's going to feel cold everywhere.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you now with this health warning, with families and doctors being warned to be on the lookout for symptoms of Strep A. At least 6 children have died from the infection. 4-year-old Camilla Rose Burns is fighting for her life on a ventilator in Liverpool after contracting the highly contagious infection. Well, parents across the country are being urged to act quickly if they have any concerns about their children's health. Well, joining us now is Dr. Chris Smith, a virologist and consultant at Cambridge University. I think we've just lost the link to him, but let's just actually update you on what we're being told by the health experts, where we're being told that doctors are now being urged to actually give children antibiotics in first instance, lowering the threshold on that, because clearly many viruses at this time of year where antibiotics are not actually effective. But I think we can now join Dr. Smith. Dr. Chris Smith, thanks for joining us. We had a bit of a glitch there on the signal. I was just pointing out that obviously at this time of year, many GPs see kids coming in with coughs and colds, which are normally viruses, and therefore they don't give antibiotics. Could that be why so many parents have actually said their children have got so ill with this Strep A infection?
I think that's unlikely. 80 or 90% of the time, upper respiratory infections are caused by viruses, which is what you were just saying. And antibiotics are no use against a viral infection. And GPs for many years have been trying to limit the use of antibiotics where they're not required in order to minimise side effects for the patient, because no drug is without side effects, but also to try to minimise the rates of antibiotic resistance. What we think is underpinning the current uptick in rates of both streptococcal infection per se, but also this more extreme manifestation, this invasive infection that can cause sepsis, and in fact numbers are up about 5-fold on where we were before the pandemic. We think it's probably not a reflection in a change in the bacterium. It's the same old strep that's always been infecting us, as far as we can tell. We think the thing that's changed is us. We think that probably measures that have been put in place over the last about 3 years to control the pandemic have in some way sensitized us as a population and made it more likely that we're going to see more cases all at once. And if you've got more cases in a community, there are more people to give it to the more susceptible people, and the more susceptible people are then more likely to present in the way that they have. We think that's probably what underpins this.
OK, but the problem is that the children are not as good as fighting this thing off once it gets hold.
Well, we don't know at the moment. One speculation is this could be a bit of a 1-2 punch phenomenon. Perhaps in the same way that just because of COVID restrictions, we're seeing enormous numbers of people with very, very large numbers of upper respiratory infections caused by viruses. Yeah. It could well be that perhaps infection with one of those sensitizes you or makes you more susceptible to infection or colonization with strep turning into an infection with strep. So, for instance, if you catch a dose of the flu beforehand, it's a bit like using a battering ram to knock down the doors of your castle. Once you've knocked the doors down, other people can then scurry in the breach in your defences. So it may well be that a prior infection with a virus sensitizes people or renders them more susceptible, and the strep that's always there and already there can then get a toehold. And it could be that that's what's going on.
So from what you're saying, this leaves it very difficult for not just the parents, but the doctors to decide which course of action to take. What should the warning signs be between a strep infection and what might be just a viral cold?
Well, viral colds normally cause a runny nose. So one giveaway, if you've got a high temperature and a sore throat, but a runny nose as well. Now, you could have a viral infection on top, but 80 or 90% of the time, it's going to be a virus. Yeah. The majority of the time, this will pass off trivially, and simple remedies like paracetamol are going to make this go away, and a person will follow the normal trajectory that we're all used to seeing with a cold, and you get better. Yeah. But with a bacterial infection like strep, you might see other manifestations beginning to come in. A rash. Now, some viruses do cause a rash, which means it is harder to tell apart, but it's a bumpy rash. So if your skin feels a bit sandpapery when you run your hand over it, it could be this. If you've got a bright red flushed appearance on your cheeks, that could be that you've got scarlet fever. This is one sign that the infection is becoming more significant, and it could then become an invasive infection. If a person doesn't get better with the normal trajectory of a cold, they've got those rash signs, they're also showing other signs of deterioration, then you should definitely seek a second opinion from your GP. And the good news is that if caught early, these strep infections respond reliably and reassuringly to cheap and cheerful, very safe antibiotics like amoxicillin.
OK, and if you don't, how quickly can this thing turn against you, if you like, in your own body, and as you say, lead to sepsis and the body poisoning itself?
Very quickly. And this isn't just children. This can happen to adults as well. And a close colleague of mine ended up in this situation and ended up in intensive care a few years ago with an invasive infection that started off as something trivial and got into the wrong place, into the bloodstream, and then turned into this phenomenon we call sepsis. So the answer is, if you see an individual and they've had this protracted illness, they've had some of these other signs and symptoms we've been discussing, they aren't getting better, and then they show signs of getting a lot worse, a higher fever, cold, clammy, shut down, then you should definitely take that seriously and get a second opinion.
Dr. Chris Smith, consultant at Cambridge University, very useful advice. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on GB News. Thank you. Stay healthy, stay safe indeed, and obviously get in touch with a medical practitioner and get expert advice as soon as you believe things are going all right. Coming up, it's another Netflix trailer. What are they up to this time? We'll be asking our royal correspondent. First, let's get an update on the news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 1:31. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Labour says it will look at abolishing the House of Lords if it wins the next general election, describing the current system as indefensible.
Sir Keir Starmer set out his blueprint for a new Britain, promising the biggest ever transfer of power from Westminster to nations and regions if his party comes into power. Launching a report which was led by the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, Keir Starmer promised to overhaul the way the country's governed. The UK's biggest business group says there'll be a decade of lost economic growth in Britain if action isn't taken by the government. The CBI says it's likely the country's already in recession, with rocketing inflation, negative growth and falling productivity. The Transport Secretary Mark Harper says the RMT's decision to reject an improved pay offer is incredibly disappointing and unfair to the public. A pay rise of 8% and a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies before April 2024 had been tabled. But the UK's biggest rail union says the deal wouldn't protect its members and would lead to unsafe practices. England forward Raheem Sterling's flown back to the UK after a burglary at his home. Surrey police say watches and jewellery were stolen, but confirmed his family weren't in the house at the time of the robbery. The England manager Gareth Southgate was unable to say whether the footballer would return to Qatar for the match against France on Saturday. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of the markets. The pound will buy you $1.2297 and €1.1620 euros. The price of gold is at £1,459.57 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,582 points.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, brace yourselves for a new trailer for Harry and Meghan's Netflix documentary that's been released, and the news that the first episode will be viewable in full this Thursday. Well, Prince Harry talks about his pain and suffering, and it includes claims from the couple and those around them that so-called hatred was directed at Meghan, all about race. Well, there's a clip coming up just to warn you that it does have flashing images.
There's a hierarchy of the family. You know, there's leaking, but there's also planting of stories.
There was a war against Meghan to suit other people's agendas.
It's about hatred. It's about race.
It's a dirty game. The pain and suffering of women marrying into this institution, this feeding frenzy.
I realized they're never going to protect you.
I was terrified. I didn't want history to repeat itself. No one knows the full truth.
Well, joining us is our raw reporter Cameron Walker, who, of course, has just returned from Boston with the Prince and Princess of Wales, who was said to be weary. I think it was the term that was used about both Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace with all this.
Yeah, so a source told the Mail on Sunday that the King and the Queen consorts are weary about the amount of grievances that Harry and Meghan intend to air in public rather than being worried. I think from Kensington Palace's perspective, they very much are going to be continuing with their engagements, particularly in Boston with Earthshot, and I don't think perhaps we're going to see them make too much of a deal out of this. However, if there are specific allegations which target members of the working royal family, it wouldn't surprise me if we do see some kind of statement from either Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace. The reason for that is, after the Oprah interview of 2021, where Meghan accused an unnamed member of the royal family of questioning what colour Archie's skin would be when he was born, and Harry accused his father of financially cutting him off, both of which were denied. But the Queen said recollections may vary. She set a precedent that they can answer back if necessary.
Yeah, and therefore this phrase that's now being used of pushback, that William may actually challenge those claims if he believes they are not based fairly on the actual truth.
That's what reports are suggesting. Of course, the late Queen had this ethos all her life that it was never complain, never explain.
Yeah.
I think the era of that is gone with the modern royals. At the moment, Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace are staying silent, but of course, that could change because there are clearly some allegations just by seeing this minute-long trailer.
War, hatred, race, dirty game, feeding frenzy. I mean, it's not collegiate, is it, should we say?
I think one line that sticks out is no one knows the full truth, we know the full truth. It is important to point out that this is the full truth from Harry and Meghan's perspective. It's clearly there are two sides to every story. But clearly it's going to talk about the comparisons between the alleged hounding of the press of Princess Diana, his mother, who died in 1997 in a car crash being chased by paparazzi, and the alleged treatment of the press by Meghan Markle as well. So clearly I think Harry will focus particularly on that point.
And he's carried that on his shoulders, and clearly perhaps it is still unresolved. However, this is a commercial exercise. They have signed a huge deal for this documentary and, of course, for the book. If they are saying the same things that they've said again and just keep going round with this wheel of complaint, the public are going to tire of it. Are they not going to watch? They're not going to buy the book?
Well, exactly. That is a possibility. Prince Harry said in the Oprah interview, I was concerned history was going to repeat itself. And in this trailer, he also said, I was concerned the history was going to repeat itself. My point being that there's only so many times you can make the same arguments or complain or make the same complaints in public. What's new to say? I think that's the question.
And Clarence House has said this as well, to a degree.
So Buckingham Palace, yes, they have said, well, according to sources from the Mail on Sunday, that they are growing weary of their complaints because it's the same complaints over and over again. So unless there's anything that's completely new, it wouldn't surprise me if the British public don't take much sympathy with the couple.
Now, this airs on Thursday on Netflix, so is it the new Crown that we can binge watch it all in one go or not, as the case may be?
It's the real-life Crown drama, as some people are dubbing it, yes. 6 episodes. The first 3 are airing on Thursday. The final 3 are going to be airing a week on Thursday, so the 15th of December, which happens to coincide with the Princess of Wales's carol concert at Westminster Abbey. So that is now twice Harry and Meghan's Netflix documentary has overshadowed the work of the Prince.
Because the first trailer was released when they were doing their Earth shot thing in Boston, where you were.
Their second day in Boston, it was released, yes. So
can you just let us into what the reaction was from the party out there when they saw this coming out?
It was remarkably stoic, to be honest. I think perhaps behind closed doors it was slightly more... There was a lot of frustrations, I think. However, publicly, it was very much focusing on their engagements and the Earthshot prize, but perhaps behind closed doors it was slightly different.
Yes, well, we shall see what the reaction is on Thursday when we get the full edition, as it were. Cameron, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. From royals to politics, the big story of the day, Sir Keir Starmer's announcement on levelling up and constitutional reform, all put together by a former Labour Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, including abolishing the House of Lords with an elected second chamber, giving more powers to the Scottish Government too. Well, joining us now, our political reporter Olivia Utley. Olivia, thanks for coming in to... tell us about New Britain, apparently. Was that the phrase? I mean, how much of it is actually new? We've heard about the House of Lords before.
Yes, we have. This isn't the first time that this policy suggestion's come up. It comes as part of a package from this review that Gordon Brown has published at the behest of Keir Starmer. There are 40 recommendations in it, and it's all about ending a century of centralisation, as Gordon Brown puts it. There isn't that much new in it. It basically boils down to more devolution and abolishing the House of Lords, a proposal which has been mentioned many times before. What impact this will have with the public, it's quite hard to say. I mean, there's an article in The Telegraph now by Tom Harris, who's a former Labour MP, who says that, who was a former minister, actually, in the Labour government under Blair, who thinks that this is what governments do when they run out of ideas. They start off, constitutional reforms, but is that what people are going to be worried about when they're struggling to feed their family?
They can't afford heating and food,
Christmas?
Indeed.
Exactly.
I'm just looking, too, at what Gordon Brown... Because, I mean, there's more Gordon Brown than Keir Starmer, it seems, in terms of the detail so far. The report identifying 288 new economic areas that will be outside London. And as, Darren was saying a little earlier, that's most of Britain, isn't it? 288 places. I mean... What's going to happen in terms of spreading out from London? What do they want to see?
Yeah, so it, as you say, it would basically involve devolution of most of Britain. There are a lot of questions floating around of whether it's possible, whether you can do something sort of that constitutionally ambitious.
Yeah, the Assembly
in a
for 33 Acacia Avenue,
Exactly, which is what Starmer is promising. He's promising that it would be done in Labour's first 5 years in office. The other question, of course, is whether it's desirable. Devolution usually polls very well with the public because people think, yes, of course I want the people around me to make decisions for me rather than the people in Westminster. But actually, the history of devolution, which is what the Tories were already pointing to, has been pretty rocky. There are some instances where it seems to have actually delivered for the local people in local areas, but some could say that more often than not, it hasn't really.
And just another layer of admin.
Another layer of bureaucracy
tends
to be the issue, especially with these new metro mayors, which are, we've had these metro mayors for a few years, but now they're doing a slightly different system for new mayors, which is supposed to take out the bureaucracy altogether. But that's proving pretty rocky as well because it puts new mayors at odds with local councils. So it's quite difficult to imagine how something so sort of constitutionally ambitious could be implemented in such a short period of time.
And when we haven't got the detail either. Olivia, for the moment, thank you for that. Well, let's actually head north of the border to see what might be put in place there. And we can speak now to Craig Hoy, Conservative MSB for South Scotland. Mr Hoy, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We gather that both Keir Starmer and Gordon Brown are heading to Edinburgh as we speak to perhaps unveil a little bit more about north of the border. But in general terms, given, of course, the whole debate about independence, is this a positive move for Scotland, do you think?
I don't think it is. I think at a time we've got a global cost of living crisis and an energy crisis, I think the Scottish public will be asking why. Why does Scottish Labour and Gordon Brown want to hand more powers effectively to Nicola Sturgeon? I think what we want to see here in Scotland are both our governments and both our parliaments working together in the Scottish national interest, and that means tackling the cost of living crisis and dealing with all those problems that we see in our public services as a result of the SNP's obsession with independence.
Yeah,
we
but
need to
is
use
it
the powers
actually
that we have to full effect and good effect?
Is it actually a way of blowing the whole independence issue out of the water by going for more devolution?
No, because I think if we give Nicola Sturgeon an inch on this question, we know she takes a mile. I think the solution is to force the SNP to use the powers that they have to deliver for the Scottish people. And I think it's naive for Gordon Brown and Scottish Labour to think that they can somehow quell nationalism by meeting Nicola Sturgeon halfway.
OK, and Olivia Utley making the point, it could be yet another level of local bureaucracy, local admin. I mean, is that going to count against it as well, in your view?
I think the issue here in Scotland is we have a very powerful parliament, one of the most powerful of all parliaments anywhere in the world. And I think what's important is that we use those powers to tackle the problems we have here in Scotland. And I think if you look at the measures the UK government are taking, for example, in levelling up and MOD orders for Type 26 frigates on the Clyde and free ports, for example, there's a huge amount that we can do with Westminster and Holyrood working together. We don't need to revisit the devolution settlement.
However, looking at what Gordon Brown's push towards this new Britain, clearly there is a desire from Labour to move things away from London and to get more local decision-making. And as Olivia was again indicating, that has proved quite popular in the past with people.
Well, obviously here in Scotland, we have devolution and we have a Scottish Parliament that was formed in 1999. The system was meant to have two governments working together in concert to try and deliver for the Scottish people. And I think the issue now is that we know Nicola Sturgeon will press for independence at any price, and Labour now appear to be playing the same game by giving her further powers. What we want to do is we want to use the powers that we have here in Holyrood. I'm a member of the Scottish Parliament, and we aren't spending enough time framing legislation that will deliver for the Scottish people. So it's about using the institution we already have better and more efficiently, rather than adding more powers into the Scottish Parliament. I don't think the Scottish people want right now. They want us to be focused on their priorities and to be delivering for them, rather than going into, I think, what Scottish Labour is doing, which is some kind of constitutional sort of fiddling around at the edges in relation to the Scottish Parliament. Quite clearly, what we need to do is have a Scottish government that is competently discharging the powers we already have. And that's why I think the Scottish Conservatives are standing up to the SNP and providing a real alternative to the SNP using the devolved context that we already have here in Scotland.
Craig Hoy, Conservative MSP for South Scotland, thanks very much for joining us here on GB News. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Dave.
The Online Safety Bill, the government's flagship internet regulation, returns to Parliament today after a 5-month delay. Well, families who believe social media have contributed in some way to their children's deaths are among those urging the government to make key amendments to the bill, including giving parents access to their children's accounts if their death is believed to be linked to social media use. Well, joining us now from Westminster, our London reporter Alice Porter. And Alice, of course, this has been a long and winding road for this particular legislation, and the parents trying to get their say all along that line as well.
Absolutely. It's incredible to think that this legislation was originally proposed by Theresa May. It's gone through 4 successive prime ministers, and along the way, the bill has changed in many ways. Initially, it was very much designed to help protect people against online abuse and online harassment. But then that very much sort of changed in 2017, and that's because of the death of Molly Russell, who was the teenager from North London who took her own life after viewing some very disturbing content on social media platforms. And her father, Ian Russell, was very much spearheaded that campaign, sort of trying to put pressure on both tech companies and the government to do more to protect young people against viewing disturbing content online. So that's very much how the bill has changed in time. Over what we're going to actually see, the sort of details that has been put out by Parliament in their proposals recently. They're going to criminalise non-consensual deep-fake pornography. So that's when somebody puts an image of someone such as myself or anybody, and they put them onto a pornographic image of somebody else, so it would look like like me, and that would be criminalised, of course, something that's immensely upsetting to anyone who's experienced that. It would also make, there'd be also down blousing, which is when people take photos without your consent down people's top. That would also be a criminal offence. But more than anything, what we're seeing in this legislation is a greater emphasis on tech companies to do more in terms of having a duty of care to young people. And one of the main ways that's going to sort of come about is any encouragement of self-harm would be made illegal. And that's very much because of what's happened with Molly Russell and because of the campaigning by her father for many, many years there. There was an inquest into her death in September, and the coroner who was involved with it said that she died partly as a result of viewing disturbing online content. And it was very much, it was very unusual to have a coroner say something in such strong terms. So it's put enormous pressure really on tech companies and on the government with this online safety bill.
Yeah, and still concerns, however, at the strength and the depth that these various tech companies, Twitter, Facebook, or Meta and so on, have gotten at how they could make this legislation stick.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Ian Russell has accused the government of actually watering down the bill because they've got an amendment in place, which would mean social media sites no longer have to take down material which is legal but harmful, i.e. it doesn't make the criminal threshold, and they've accused them of watering it down. But I think the difficulty they've got is one of the reasons that was that amendment was put forward because of concerns from some MPs over free speech, and that's why this bill has been so controversial in many ways. How do you regulate the internet? How do you make sure it's safe for people, particularly young people, but also make sure that there is free speech for people? And we've very much seen that debate played out quite recently with Elon Musk taking over Twitter, and there's been concerns about some of the people who've suddenly been allowed to have their Twitter platforms back when some people would say it's been quite harmful. So that's been the kind of the debate on one side, but there's been also parents who say that this legislation doesn't go far enough, and today there's going to be 5 bereaved families, 5 families who've lost children in connection with social media, and they're going to be lobbying the government to put an amendment forward to this bill, which would mean, as you were saying in your introduction there, that social media companies would have to release their children's records, any evidence, if any children or any person were to die as a result of social media platforms. And that's because of what happened with Molly Russell. Her father spent 5 years campaigning to get that material and ended up finding 16,000 posts, which were very harmful. And that contributed to her inquest in September. That was very much a landmark case. So they're hoping that they could put more pressure on the government to make sure that that information is widely available, because in many ways tech companies have been able to operate in some ways without necessarily having the checks and balances of perhaps other companies. And so those families will want that change. But I think the real question at the heart of this is how will some of this be policed? You know, if a teenage girl posts some photos of showing scarring from self-harming and she's a 14-year-old girl, would she be arrested? And I think that's one of the detail we still don't have quite yet when it comes to this bill.
Alice, Westminster, thank you very much indeed updating us, and we'll get you the latest on that particular bill. But I think we can break away to bring you the latest now on the World Cup. And we're heading to Doha.
Amazing front line with so much.
And Saka is speaking.
Attacking players, and yeah, when you get selected in that lineup, it shows how much confidence and trust the coach puts in you. So it gives you that extra confidence to go out there and shine. And last night you were able to do that.
It's a huge quarter-final coming up against the world champions. Do you think England need to change the way that you play, maybe change the formation, or would you like to see England go toe-to-toe with France?
Well, I'm not a manager, you know, I'm a player. Yeah, I have to trust Gareth and our coaching staff to obviously prepare their best game plan, but I think, you know, we can continue to do what we're doing. You know, we've been playing well and we've scored, like you said, the most goals in the tournament, so I don't see us needing to change too much.
Good man, thank you.
Thank you.
Hiya. Gareth's record now in tournament football is pretty exemplary. Given that the form coming into the World Cup was a bit rocky, let's say, what is it about the group and Gareth that makes England really click when it matters?
I think, of course, you know, this team in general has a lot of players that have played in big tournaments, you know, so there's a lot of tournament experience, you know. if you look at the last few results, you know, in the tournaments we've been in, we've got to, I think, a semi-final, a final, and maybe a quarter-final. So, you know, there's a lot of experience in there. So, you know, when the big games come, we have a lot of players that know what they need to do.
All the talk now, of course, is about Mbappe and how you stop him. But, of course, there's much more to France than just him. What is it about England specifically and the qualities that you have that can cause them perhaps just as many problems as they're going to cause you?
I think, first of all, if you look at our first 4 games, I think we have 3 clean sheets. So it starts, you know, how solid we've been at the back, and that's credit to defenders and obviously Pickers, our keeper. You know, they've been exceptional there. And, of course, at the same time, we've scored the most goals as well. So I feel like we just need to just prepare the best game plan and go there with confidence because we're playing good right now.
Obviously, knockout.
And that is a very confident young man, Bukayo Saka. There, no reason to change too much. 3 clean sheets is indicating, and of course that game with France on Saturday. But clearly, the England camp are in a good place. We'll have more coming up from Doha with Chris Scudder. Also, more on the winter of discontent with all the industrial strikes. Talks underway on the rail issue, and indeed a weather warning too. We'll be seeing how low the temperatures can go. All that coming up in a moment. Stay with us.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're watching GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up in this next hour, We'll have more on the crisis talks to avert the rail strikes that could clobber Christmas. The RMT has rejected the latest pay offer, but we're finding out how much the industrial action could cost our hospitality industry. Labour says it wants to radically reform Britain by moving jobs out of London, abolishing the House of Lords and banning MPs from having second jobs. But is the devil in the detail? And the latest trailer for Harry and Meghan's Netflix documentary being released, revealing the first episode will be available this Thursday. But more bombshell claims coming out. And England with the quarter-finals. How's their victory over Senegal changed the mood amongst the fans in Qatar? And we'll be hearing from Bukayo Saka as well. And what are your thoughts on what's happening as we face a severe warning on the weather coming up? Email us as ever, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let us know how you're weathering this winter of discontent. Before that, the latest news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 2:02. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Parents are being urged to look out for Strep A symptoms amid rising infections caused by the bacteria. At least 6 children across the UK have died with an invasive form of the infection in recent months. More than 850 cases were reported in the week starting the 14th of November, compared to over 180 for the same period last year. Downing Street, though, says the NHS is well prepared and says there are no shortages of antibiotics needed to treat the infections. Symptoms include a sore head, headache, throat and fever. The RMT union's being urged to think again about staging strikes, which Number 10 says is threatening to bring travel chaos over Christmas. A pay rise of 8% and a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies before April 2024 had been tabled. But the UK's biggest rail union said the deal wouldn't protect its members and would lead to unsafe practices. The strike action's due to go ahead for 4 days this month. The Education Secretary says it's disappointing the pay offer wasn't put to members.
Well, the government has facilitated the conversations between the unions and the rail companies, and it is disappointing that the RMT union have rejected a new and improved offer that was being worked on over the weekend by the rail companies. I believe they've rejected it, not put that to their members. But this is disappointing because we would expect those talks to continue and for those offers to be put to members.
Meanwhile, 33,000 members of the Fire Brigades Union will vote today if they should walk out following a 5% pay offer. The FBU say striking is the last resort, but that many are desperate, with some struggling to afford to live. Firefighter and trade unionist Paul Embry says they've been left with no option.
We're being asked to take another significant real terms pay cut, and at a time when firefighters, like everybody else across the country, are really struggling to make ends meet. I've been a firefighter for 25 years, and this is the first time really that I've had colleagues say to me they can't afford to buy their kids Christmas presents. They're struggling to pay their mortgage bills, their energy bills, etc. So it's a decision that none of us want to take, but when you consider the paltry pay offer we've been that's been tabled, we've really been left with no other option, frankly.
The government set out plans to overhaul NHS pension rules in an attempt to retain more senior doctors. The proposals would allow staff to claim their pension benefits but continue working and contributing to that pension, and also remove barriers to retired clinicians returning to work. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the move will help to open up extra GP appointments. Labour says it will look at abolishing the House of Lords if it wins the next general election, describing the current system as indefensible. So Keir Starmer set out his blueprint for a new Britain, promising the biggest ever transfer of power from Westminster to nations and regions if his party comes into power. Launching a report which was led by the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, Keir Starmer promised to overhaul the way the country's governed.
This broken model has held back our politics and held back our economy. And I'm determined we unbind ourselves and free our potential. Britain is one of the most centralised systems in Europe, and the centre has not delivered. Now, I don't want it to fall apart. I want us to build something new.
England forward Raheem Sterling's flown back to the UK after his home was broken into. Surrey police say watches and jewellery were stolen, but confirmed the Chelsea winger's family weren't in the house at the time of the robbery. Manager Gareth Southgate says family is the most important thing and couldn't say whether he'll return to Qatar for the rest of the World Cup. Prince Harry's spoken out about the pain and suffering of women marrying into the royal family, calling it an institution. The latest allegation was made in a Netflix docuseries that airs this week. In a new trailer, he says he doesn't want history to repeat itself in his married life with Meghan.
There's a hierarchy of the family. You know, there's leaking, but there's also planting of stories.
There was a war against Meghan to suit other people's agendas.
It's about hatred. It's about race. It's a dirty game. The pain and suffering of women marrying into this institution, this feeding frenzy.
I realized they're never going to protect you.
I was terrified. I didn't want history to repeat itself.
You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to Mark.
Now, if you're a Welsh rugby fan, and there are a few of us, some breaking news which is quite extraordinary. Wayne Pivac has left his position as head coach of the Welsh team to be replaced by a certain Warren Gatland, who was, of course, the previous coach, both New Zealanders, and he'll be in his position before Christmas after what's been a pretty dismal autumn international season. But bit of a merry-go-round going around in Welsh rugby. We'll have more reaction perhaps coming out on that, as we will, of course, on the World Cup, the football. But let's stay with this winter of discontent for the start of this hour, with Downing Street urging the RMT union to think again over the strikes which could paralyse our rail network in the run-up to Christmas. Well, last night the union rejected an 8% pay rise, 4% this year, 4% next year, with more talks to take place this afternoon. We understand between Network Rail and the RMT, not necessarily the rail companies. Well, with strike action planned over what's usually a very busy time of pubs, restaurants, bars, of course, growing concern about the impact it will have. Let's speak now to Kate Nichols, who's CEO of UK Hospitality, advocates for businesses from all sizes within that sector. Kate, thanks very much indeed for your time. I saw one estimate that the industrial action's causing a hit of what, about £1.5 billion to this part of the economy?
That is our best estimate, yes, based on the rolling strike action that we're going to see in the week before Christmas, the busiest trading week that our sector has, and also going over into the weekends. The fact that these are rolling strikes means that effectively the whole of that week is taken out, and our estimate of the revenue that would be lost potentially is as high as £1.5 billion.
And what about then the threat to jobs? Because I guess a lot of people within your sector don't have a big union to actually represent them. And clearly, if people aren't turning up for Christmas parties, perhaps the tips aren't there, perhaps the jobs aren't there either.
Well, I think that is one of the biggest impacts. First of all, our workers can't get to work. If there's a rail strike, many of them are dependent upon the trains to be able to get into work. And unlike many other sectors, you can't work from home in hospitality. This is our busiest trading period. So many of those who are employed in the hospitality sector would find they could have valuable extra hours, more profitable hours. As you say, there are tips that go alongside it. So workers in the sector do rely upon this week to be able to increase their wages in advance of Christmas. And clearly we are going to see many customers who will struggle to get in, not just those coming for Christmas parties, but also workers. Effectively, it is a work from home restriction that's being imposed for many people who are reliant upon town and city centres, as well as the busy weekend before Christmas for retail, for theatres, for entertainment, for families looking to socialise. That's why the economic impact on our sector is so great. And undoubtedly, with 1 in 3 businesses in our sector not breaking even as a result of COVID, still having no cash reserves, that Christmas trading period was really going to be invaluable to help them get through the bleak months and to be able to protect jobs in our sector. So there is no doubt that for this strike action will be the final nail in the coffin for many businesses and will have a knock-on effect on jobs.
Yes, I was going to ask you about this golden period, as it's called. Of course, given all the lockdowns, I guess people really were looking at this particular Christmas to try and get back on an even keel.
Absolutely. Even in the best of times, we rely upon what is known as our golden quarter. The period between Halloween and New Year's Eve is when the sector earns between 30 to 40% of its profits. And that's what's needed to get some cash in the tills, to get businesses through the very quiet periods of January, February, March, which are always tougher and leaner trading periods. So even in good years, this is an invaluable trading period. Having lost that for the last 2 years, this was going to be the make or break Christmas for many businesses. And for many businesses, they will be running out of road and not having enough cash to be able to get through the bleaker times that come ahead.
This is a controversial area. However, Number 10 has gone public, saying it will change laws, strike laws, if needed, to end what they call is a union stranglehold on Britain. Where are you on that? Because clearly, you know, people do have the right to withdraw their labour. But if it does mean it's bringing the rest of the economy to a halt, clearly questions have got to be asked.
Well, this is a matter between unions and the employers, first and foremost, but clearly government is a key stakeholder in this public sector dispute. We urge all sides, all three of those elements, to come back to the table today to try and make sure that we can have an agreement reached before Christmas to suspend these strikes, avoid this devastating impact on the sector, and then it'll be for government to determine how they move forward to be able to protect basic levels of service, to be able to make sure that the economy can function.
Kate, thank you very much indeed for your time, and I will risk wishing you a Merry Christmas if we can get there all together. Thanks very much indeed.
And to you.
Well, let's actually look at this in more detail now and what it means for the rest of the economy. Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, coming up now with On the Money. Well, as we were saying, Liam, controversial area, but Number 10 clearly starting to openly talk about some kind of industrial law to take the strikers to task in these particular key areas, such as transport.
Back in the day, Mark, 1978, 1979, the original winter of discontent, it was much easier for trade unions to strike. Successive governments, Conservative and Labour, tightened up those laws. Yeah. Unions now need at least 50% of their members in a ballot, and of those balloted who return their response, at least half have to vote for strike action.
And they have to re-ballot as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
So these laws are tighter, but maybe Downing Street wants to tighten them, and it will do that if it feels that they're winning against the unions in the campaign for public hearts and minds. Now, we've seen this sort of battle for hearts and minds after the RMT saying that they won't accept this 8% payoff for 4% in successive years, as you rightly point out. So they're going to go ahead with strikes on the 13th and the 14th, that's a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and then the 16th and the 17th of December.
And an overtime ban as well, which could hit just as badly. Yeah.
Because strikes kind of bleed over into the next day and the day before. It's basically a whole week at least in the run-up to Christmas where people aren't going to be able to use the trains in the way that they need to get to work, to go shopping, and that's why Kate Nichols is talking there about the impact on hospitality. Hospitality, which employs 1 in 10 British workers, remember.
And a lot of youngsters as well.
So I do think we are going to see a battle for hearts and minds. The nurses are obviously striking because they want a 19% pay rise. That's in a single year. And it remains to be seen. I personally think a lot of the public are going to lose patience quite a lot more quickly than the union leaders think.
Yeah, and you've written about this difference between public sector pay and pay awards and the private sector. And a lot of this industrial action is in the public sector. And clearly people are very frustrated. They're finding it very difficult. But they're the ones that has got the industrial muscle at the moment.
They have. So, again, another difference between the winter of discontent in the late 70s and now is back then, over half the British workforce as a whole was unionised. We had lots of nationalised industries. Now it's around a quarter, 1 in 4. But within the public sector, it is just over a half who are unionised. And during lockdown, of course, be it teachers, health unions, their leaders became a lot more militant, even if the rank and file workers didn't become more militant. And so we've seen strikes among teachers in Scotland. We know the NEU, the main teachers union in the UK, is balloting its members. We know there are 100,000 civil servants, Border Force, DVLA, Passport Office who have voted to strike. We don't know when that's going to kick in. This rail strike, of course, is kind of a hybrid public-private sector because the train operating companies, they're private companies, but they're backed with a lot of state money, just like Network Rail, which runs the actual
critical
train lines. So you can't quite say if they're private or public. What I would say is that if you look at the numbers, while, you know, in the private sector, some people get stupendously high wages in the City of London and so on. A lot of people are on very low wages. And on average, Mark, public sector pay, on average, is just a little bit higher, about 8% higher, the last ONS numbers I saw, than private sector pay. And then on top of that, public sector workers tend to get much better sick leave, holiday entitlement, very lucrative pensions in many cases. So all these issues are going to come to the fore, and I do think there will be a dogfight between the government and employers on the one hand, unions on the other, as the public tries to decide who's in the right.
And very quickly, the latest snapshot of the economy from the CBI, the bosses' trade union, if you like, talking of stagflation, which again is something we heard in the 70s, a stagnant economy with inflation, which means basically that, you know, spending power for most people has just disappeared.
The CBI represents 190,000 British businesses, tends to be bigger businesses, as you say. And so when they give some forecasts of what's going to happen in the economy, you kind of take notice. I mean, no one knows what's going to happen, but the CBI, back in June, it was saying that the British economy would expand 1% in 2023. They're now saying that the British economy is going to shrink by 0.4%. Now, that isn't quite as gloomy as the Office for Budget Responsibility, the official forecaster, which is looking at a 1.4% contraction next year. But even, you know, a 0.4% contraction, it's not pretty going forward. And
not just for one quarter, for the whole year.
Economies can turn. Economies can turn on the sixpence. If we get, you know, a breakout of peace between Russia and the West and the oil price falls, that could really help. We've still got relatively low unemployment in this country. There is still investment coming in, but certainly challenging economic times.
Yeah, not a very Merry Christmas at the moment, at least. Liam, for the moment, thank you for that. Let's stay with the politics, because Labour has unveiled its blueprint for an overhaul of the UK's constitution, for a new Britain, as it called it. A report prepared by former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, including a raft of recommendations to change our political system, including, yes, replacing the House of Lords. Well, Sir Keir Starmer says he wants to see the biggest ever transfer of power from Westminster to the British people. Well, joining us now is Dr. Craig Prescott, a constitutional law and politics expert at Bangor University in Wales. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Prescott. One of the things that, just on the sort of constitutional issue, when they're actually talking about what they said was a new political protected social rights, you know, we don't have a written constitution at the moment, do we?
No, we don't have a written constitution, and we're one of only 3 countries in the world that don't, alongside New Zealand and Israel. So what that does mean is that, in principle, it's relatively easy to change the constitution, because ultimately all you need is to pass an act of parliament. And so what that does mean is that, you know, all these potential constitutional reforms are in play. They are, in principle, achievable. You don't have to go through any process in order to deliver them.
Yeah, they're saying it's a blueprint for a new Britain, but actually sort of digging down in the detail, a lot of it just seems to be devolution, but to a further degree.
Yes, this is in some ways, it's become the Cinderella of British politics, that all political parties for the past 10, 15 years have promised devolution to, yes, Wales and Scotland, but also to the regions or to local authorities. We've seen combined authorities in some parts of England. We've seen elected mayors in other parts of England. And, you know, what this has done has made sort of local government more complex. So maybe there is value in thinking, let's start again and think about how we really want local areas in England in particular to be governed. Yeah, but it is a complex.
Could it be that the fact that we've got Labour mayors from Manchester, Andy Burnham, for London, Sadiq Khan, that maybe Labour sees some political advantage in doing this?
Well, inevitably, politicians are always the midwives of constitutional change. And yes, sort of, there's always a sense that, they're going to introduce political changes, constitutional changes that benefit them. Another perennial is always proportional representation.
Yeah.
Some parties campaign and say, we'll do it. But once they get into government, all of a sudden they lose interest because they're quite in favour of the system that got them into power in the first place. So there's always political considerations here.
Yeah. And talking of perennial issues, the House of Lords. Here we go again, some people may be thinking. Why is it that Labour seems so besotted with the sort of position of the second chamber?
Well, I always think of House of Lords reform as the Bermuda Triangle of British politics, in that, there's always proposals, but they never seem to go anywhere. Now, as regards Labour's interest, they've always had an interest in reforming the House of Lords. In principle, it goes back historically in that once upon a time, it was full of the aristocracy, and Labour was formed out of a very different constituency, so they never had much representation. Now, as time, of course, that's changed, but there are potentially some problems with the House of Lords today. The general view is that it might be a bit too big. Some appointments might be questionable over the past few years. Prime ministers essentially have a free hand in who they appoint. And, there's a general sense that maybe it's time to look at this and put this on a better footing. Whether that means abolishing it completely, I'm less sure about. Maybe there are some incremental changes we could do along the way.
Dr. Craig Prescott from Bangor University, thank you very much indeed for your time. And let's just update you with the fact that Sir Keir Starmer, who's heading to Edinburgh at the moment with Gordon Brown, saying what those reforms meant for Scottish arguments for independence, said his party was arguing for a changed Scotland in a changed UK. We're not arguing for the status quo. And the mandate we will seek is in the election. So more from Edinburgh as we hear it on that. Coming up to the online safety bill returning to Parliament in Westminster today. After nearly 6 months of delay, we'll be hearing what it could mean for the bereaved families and calling for more regulation of the web. But let's take a short break now.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
And welcome back. Now, the Online Safety Bill, that's the government's flagship internet regulation, returns to Parliament today after a 5-month delay. Among those who will be at Westminster, families who believe that social media contributed in some way to their children's deaths. And they're urging the government to make a number of key amendments to the bill. Let's get the latest from Westminster now with our London reporter, Alice Porter. And Alice, as we've been reflecting, this has been a real long and winding road for these families, but clearly with perhaps the best intention to make sure they get it absolutely right.
Absolutely. I mean, it's incredible to think how many governments this bill has gone through. It's gone through 4 prime ministers to get to this stage. But this has been very much long awaited for the families involved, particularly Ian Russell, who's the father of Molly Russell, who sadly took her own life back in 2017. And it then became apparent that she'd been involved with viewing a lot of content on different social media platforms which related to suicide and self-harm. And that really reignited a discussion about the concerns of online safety and what social media companies need to do in order to protect children. And so that's very much a key part of what we're seeing from this bill, which is being looked at by MPs today, is putting much greater focus on these big tech companies to do more to protect children, particularly in regards to making sure that encouragement of self-harm is illegal. And that's going to be a very key component of that bill, and that's really because Molly Russell was viewing content that very much glorified issues to do with self-harm, and that was very apparent in the inquest that happened in September, and that was very much in the coroner's comments there. She died as a result, partly, of some of the online content she was seeing in regards to suicide and self-harm. So that's going to be a very key aspect of this bill, but there's also some other aspects that will criminalise for the first time pornographic deep fakes, and that's when someone sort of superimposes an image of someone's face onto someone else. There's also going to be down blousing, which is when someone takes someone's photo down someone's shirt without their consent. That will also be criminalised. So some interesting sort of aspects for adults there, but the sort of main bulk of it really, and I think the one that is of interest particularly to parents who'd be campaigning, is a greater focus on tech companies and a greater accountability for them as well.
And very quickly, I mean, how long before we actually see this going through Parliament? How long will the process be?
We've still got quite a long way to go, and I think that is something that has been criticised by Labour and as well as parents who've been campaigning there. And they're also criticising the government for watering down some key aspects to this bill. And one of the ways they're critical is that it's going to material which is legal but harmful, that will still not be moderated by social media platforms. So that's been criticised by some of the parents who are campaigning. But of course, the government is in a position where they're trying to keep people happy in regards to free speech, and that's one of the reasons that amendment was put forward, is because of concerns of making sure that there is still free speech whilst regulating it and making it safe for people. And that's made it very difficult for the government. It's one of the reasons why this bill has been so controversial, and it's has so many different stages, and we've still got quite a long way to go.
Alice, from the moment at Westminster, thank you very much indeed for that. But let's get the views now of Rani Govender, who's policy officer at the child protection charity, the NSPCC. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. As Alice was saying there, clearly a way to go yet, particularly on this issue of legal but harmful.
Yeah, so the government has made a number of key changes to the bill which impact the
content adults can see online. What's really important is that they've committed that children will still be protected from seeing harmful content online. That means extremely harmful content that promotes self-harm, that promotes eating disorders, will not be able to be seen by children. Companies will have a legal responsibility to protect children from seeing that content. That's really important because we know about the devastating impacts that can happen, and it's crucial that the government sticks to that commitment.
And is one of the concerns that given the power and the deep pockets that these tech giants have got, Meta, Facebook and Twitter perhaps increasingly, trying to hold them to account on this will be difficult?
You're right. It's really important that the bill has strong accountability measures so that tech companies have to sit up and listen when this bill comes into force. That's why at the NSPTC, we're calling for the bill to include provisions for companies like Meta to appoint a senior manager who would be responsible for keeping children safe on their platform, and they'd be liable if there were serious instances of harm to occur.
Yeah, because, of course, they're international companies and this will be British legislation. So, in a way, you can only really make it apply in Britain.
Yes, the scope of the regulation will be in the UK, and that's why if we're going to see a real culture change across these platforms, going all the way to Silicon Valley, we need to make sure that the bill has teeth and the Ofcom has the enforcement powers that will make these companies take real notice of these changes. We think if there was a senior manager who was liable for harm to children on their platforms, that's one way that we could ensure that companies take this bill seriously and finally put child protection front and centre of their platforms.
Yeah. Rani Govender from NSPCC, thank you very much indeed. And of course, we'll see what emerges as that bill continues through Westminster. Thanks very much indeed. You're watching GB News Live. Coming up, Strep A still on the rise. At least 6 children confirmed to have died from the highly contagious infection. What should we be doing to actually ensure our children are safe? Details coming up. First, let's get a news bulletin with Rosie.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 2:32. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Parents are being urged to look out for Strep A symptoms amid rising infections caused by the bacteria. At least 6 children have died with an invasive form of the infection in recent months. More than 850 cases were reported in the week starting the 14th of November. That's compared to over 180 for the same period last year. Downing Street says the NHS is well prepared and there are no shortages of the antibiotics needed to treat the infection. Symptoms include a sore throat, headache and fever. The RMT is being urged to think again about staging rail strikes, which threaten to bring travel chaos over Christmas. Number 10 says the current offer of an 8% pay rise over 2 years, as well as a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies before April 2024, is fair. It was rejected, though, by the union, which says the deal won't protect its members and will lead to unsafe practices. Labour says it will look at abolishing the House of Lords if it wins the next general election, describing the current system as indefensible. Sir Keir Starmer set out his blueprint for a new Britain, promising the biggest ever transfer of power from Westminster to nations and regions if his party comes into power. Launching a report which was led by the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, Sir Keir Starmer's promised to overhaul the way the country's governed. England forward Raheem Sterling has flown back to the UK after a burglary at his home. Surrey police say watches and jewellery were stolen, but confirmed his family weren't in the house at the time of the robbery. Manager Gareth Southgate was unable to say whether the footballer would return to Qatar for the next game against France this weekend. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons. I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, families and doctors being warned to be on the lookout for symptoms of Strep A after at least 6 children have died from the infection. It can cause many different illnesses, including scarlet fever and strep throat, which is more common. But sometimes the bacteria can be life-threatening, even forming sepsis. Well, parents across the country now are being urged to act quickly if they suspect their child may be infected. Well, joining us now, Dr. David Turner, who's a consultant microbiologist at the University of Nottingham. Dr. Turner, thanks for your time. Clearly, a lot of GPs now are being warned to lower the threshold on administering antibiotics, which, of course, do no good in terms of viruses. But clearly, this bacterial infection can do real harm.
Yeah, that's right. And we're seeing an increase in disease at the moment. So GPs and all healthcare professionals in outpatient settings and in emergency departments are on the alert to look out for this infection.
Is there any evidence, you think, that this is a particularly virulent bacteria that's on the loose out there, that this is something new?
No, I don't think this is what we know. We know this is nothing new. We see increases in disease with this bug every few years. In 2017, 2018, pre-COVID, we saw increases with Group A strep as well. So every few years we see increasing disease. We don't really know why. Sometimes it may be associated with a post-influenza or other respiratory viruses. If you've had a respiratory virus, you're then a bit more susceptible to getting invasive infection. So we're seeing a lot of influenza, a lot of RSV at the moment. It might be because of that.
So it could be like a double whammy. And I guess that makes it particularly difficult for the GP who may think, well, this might be just a virus and, you know, take a couple of paracetamol and have some rest, when in fact something else is going on inside the body.
That's right, yes. It is difficult always to know exactly what's happening in the early stages of these infections, because they can mimic infections. So that is difficult. But what we watch out for is children, particularly children who are more unusually unwell. They may have a high fever, they may have had scarlet fever, and that needs to be treated with antibiotics. So there are features that GPs and nurses will look out for, and obviously parents should be looking out for the same features. And parents should trust their own instincts. If their child is unusually unwell, they do need to seek medical advice from NHS 111 or from their GP service.
Yeah, and don't leave it too late, because clearly this can take hold quite quickly. But is there a particular problem with this being a bacterial infection? It can spread quite easily in schools where the children are in close contact with the sneezes and so on.
Yeah, so it is a respiratory bacterium. It is carried at the back of people's throats and on the skin. So any close contact with the children or adults, it can pass very easily. So it's very transmissible. And that's why we see sometimes when children are in close contact, cases of scarlet fever can be easily transmitted. And that is a problem.
And is this particular prevalent at this time of year? Is it something that we get when sort of autumn goes into winter and we've got a lot of damp conditions and so on?
It's not particularly associated with this time of year. It can occur, increases in disease can occur at any time. But because of the link or possible link with respiratory viruses, that may be with why we're seeing increasing disease at the moment.
OK, but obviously for mum and dad at home, be alert and, as you say, trust your instincts. Dr David Turner, thanks very much indeed for joining us there at the University of Nottingham. Now, could it be finally coming home or chez nous on Saturday? Well, it might just be England making it into the quarter-finals, of course, after that victory over Senegal. And they're going up now against the reigning world champions France on Saturday. Going to be a tough match. Speaking earlier in Qatar, Bukayo Saka had outlined the path ahead for the team.
Obviously, we know the quality they have, the quality players they have, and we also know our own qualities as well. So we just got to go into the game with confidence and, do our best to win in the game. We have to believe that. We have to come into this tournament and believe that we can win it. Right now, our focus is on the next game, which is France. It's going to be a really difficult game, but we have to try and get through that and then focus on the next one, and it will get closer and closer, and hopefully we give ourselves the best chance to win it.
And he may well be the one to do it too. Let's get the latest now from Doha, because we're joined by broadcaster, author and veteran of 8 World Cups, no less. Chris Scudder is there for us in a very busy souk. Hopefully he can hear us. Chris, clearly awaiting the news conference with Gareth Southgate, but it looks as if he may have got things right against Senegal at least.
Yeah, it was more of the same, really, Mark. They were quite adventurous. I mean, the first half hour was quite sort of nervy. A lot of these teams, especially the smaller ones, kind of press the better quality side. So it takes a while for them to sort of work out how to get away around that. And once England got that first goal, which was set up by Jude Bellingham, and then he did it again for the second goal. I mean, I was there last night. The second half, it was a bit of an anticlimax, really, because the game was over. And as you saw, I mean, the great thing about this England squad is they've got this wonderful depth, really. I mean, you look at their bench, and you've got Grealish and Calvin Phillips and Mason Mount, and all these players can come on and change a game. So that's a real bonus. And England really haven't had that in the past. So, they did what they had to do, and it was quite comfortable. And by the last half hour, it was almost like a practice session for England. So, and interesting here, Bukayo Saka's tone was very measured there, wasn't it? Very kind of low key. And I think Gareth Southgate likes to not let everything get hyped up, because it is going to be a huge game against France. And I personally think whoever wins that will probably go through to the final. Obviously, there'll be a semi-final to come before that, but it's a huge occasion. And it's two of the heavyweights, the world champions, France, who we know are a very, very good side. But England have got a reasonable record against them in competitive matches. Going way back, even before, I just about remember it, I was very, very small, but when England won the World Cup in '66, they beat France along the way, and they beat them in the '82 World Cup as well. Different beast now, a modern game, but I know that the French will have a lot of respect for what England can do, and they'll be a little bit nervous looking at all the teams they could have played in this stage of the competition. They probably won't fancy it that much either. Yeah. And if England can just be calm, I think it'll be. I've got a great chance of going through, really do.
But the French do have a certain player called Mbappe, and looking how England started that first half hour where they weren't quite sure, passing back to the keeper, passing across I mean, the French would actually jump on them in those circumstances.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, listen, I mean, they were working out a way. I mean, what England would do in the past, when they would get these teams pressing on that, and they were going back across the field and back, it's just very patient. England teams in the past would have just got bored and just booted it up the field and lost possession. So, patience is part of what the ethos of the team, really. So, the other thing is, I mean, there are some people who think that Southgate might revert to type and go defensive against the French because of their offensive capability, their attacking capabilities. I don't think he will. I think it's been a revelation that England scored 12 goals so far in this tournament, and they are playing to their strengths, and that's what the fans want to see. And we don't want complaints at the end of it that, we sat back and let them dominate, and if only we'd done this. So I think, 4 games so far, top scorers, 3 wins and a draw. I think they will go for it. And, OK, there is some jeopardy in that because Harry Maguire is not the quickest and he's up against some very quick people. But I'm sure they'll have a plan for that. Kyle Walker's a very, very quick player. They might move him inside, possibly. But if they can keep Mbappe quiet, I know he's the Golden Boot wearer at the moment, he's got 5 goals, then England have got a great chance. And I think they can outscore them, I really do. So let us hope that that brave new spirit, that unified England can do plenty of damage at the other end, which I know they can.
Now, you mentioned the fans. As I said, you've been a veteran of many World Cups. Are they a bit happier out there now? Because clearly there are a few problems with the beer tent and some of the accommodation wasn't quite up to scratch. Are they a happier gang out there now?
Well, I've got to be honest with you, Mark. There are very few England fans around here today. I mean, a lot of the people I know are not in Qatar at all. They went to Dubai. A whole other story. I mean, the prices here are a scandal, quite frankly. Everything from the beer to normal prices anyway. It's always expensive here, but the accommodation was inflated way too much. And because of that, a lot of European fans have stayed away. Dubai, for example, is very popular with England fans and Wales fans, and a lot who came yesterday have flown straight back. You get 24 hours access in Qatar with the way they've got the visas and the hire card, as they call it, the Haya card. There aren't that many around today, really. I mean, this place is dominated by South Americans, Brazilians and Argentine and Mexicans who have been knocked out now. I mean, it's they're happy. They come in and there are a lot of expats here, put it that way. There are 20,000 expats who live here, are British, and looking at the crowd last night, there were a lot of adopted England fans who have made them their team, plus the expats and the few thousand who have travelled out here, but many of those, are not staying in the area.
OK, and as you say, kick-off for Japan-Croatia fairly shortly. Lots of other fans around, but we'll be back to you to get the latest, Chris, in Doha. Thanks very much indeed. But let's just reflect that last night was pretty jubilant for fans, not just in Doha. Our Northwest reporter Will Hollis joined them to soak up the mood and celebrations in Nottingham following that win.
It might be 4 degrees, but a Winter World Cup isn't all that bad.
Nice and cold out here, but I'm sure it's warm there.
I'm excited to see Phil Foden and Jack Grealish.
I've got my gloves, so warm me up, got the bib. Doesn't matter what the weather is. Doesn't matter. It's England, isn't it?
We could do a gazebo, though.
We could do a gazebo.
It's not the cold that's got England fans shivering at the Trent Navigation in Nottingham. There's a different kind of tension in the knockout stages. The Lions may have finished top of their group, but Senegal are champions in Africa.
I'd like to think we can win 2-0. 1-0 will do.
If we attack with a bit of freedom tonight, I think we'll do perfectly fine.
They're going to win the first half, lose the second half, but win the match.
What does that mean?
They're going to win.
A sluggish start, but then England find their feet. Once, and then again in the first half.
We've got 2 in the bag. I'm feeling positive. I'm calm now. I hope we win 5-0.
I went to the toilet twice and missed both of them. I'm really not happy about it. But it's coming home, so it don't matter.
As the beer flows, so do the goals. The ending is inevitable now. England 3, Senegal 0.
We won, we're through to the next round. I was confident, and the boys, they performed.
England march on with old rivals in sight. The last time they played France in a World Cup, England won. That was 1982. This time, France are reigning champions.
We're going to play France, we're going to beat them, man. If we go toe-to-toe with them, then we'll beat them. If we go defensive, then we'll lose.
But for now, that doesn't stop the singing. Will Hollis for GB News in Nottingham.
Celebrations in Nottingham, celebrations in Doha, of course, and Bukayo Saka indicating no reason to change too much. That's the word from the news conference, and we might hear from Southgate a bit later. Any developments in Doha, we'll bring it to you live here on GB News. Now, a new trailer for Harry and Meghan's Netflix documentary being released, with the news that the first episode will be available on Thursday. Well, Prince Harry talks about his pain and suffering, and it includes claims from the couple and those around them too that the so-called hatred directed at Meghan is about her race. This is a short clip, warnings that it has some flashing images.
There's a hierarchy of the family. You know, there's leaking, but there's also planting of stories.
There was a war against Meghan to suit other people's agendas.
It's about hatred. It's about race. It's a dirty game. The pain and suffering of women marrying into this institution, this feeding frenzy.
I realized they're never going to protect you.
I was terrified. I didn't want history to repeat itself. No one knows the full truth.
Will we ever find out the full truth? Joining us now, our royal reporter Cameron Walker. It's a dirty game. You could be calling basically that about documentary making or book writing. Who knows? I mean, it's ramping up a bit, isn't it?
It certainly is. I think he's clearly got a lot to say, and we're going to see it over 6 episodes of this docu-series with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. I think it's clear that he feels there was a particular agenda against him and Meghan Markle when they were still working members of the royal family, with leaks, as he said, alleged leaks, and the alleged planting of stories to the British press, which he will argue is perhaps driving him to move to America. So a lot to say, I think.
Yeah, and it's a lot of people scratching their heads where we were told they were moving to California to have a private life and get away from the media and all these issues. And here we are, not just a documentary, we've got the book coming out as well. They're making more noise, it seems now, than they were when they were here in Britain.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points on that. They said they wanted a private life, you're right, but I think it was more of a sense of trying to control the narrative, i.e. put out the stories that they want to put out, to try and get rid of the negativity which has been associated with stories of them when they were part of the firm, as it were. The second point to make is they no longer receive any money from the royal family. No sovereign grant, i.e. our money, taxpayers' money, and no private income from King Charles, for example. So the way they make money is by these reported multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix, with Spotify, and of course his book that he's got coming out in January. Now, some would argue that's the only capital they've got is their association with the royal family. That's why they're paying quite so much money to kind of maintain their luxury lifestyle.
Although he was left money, an inheritance by his mother, of course, but one reflects that maybe a lot of what he's saying, and we saw all the flashing images of the cameras there, is to do with him still trying to come to terms with what happened to his mother, and as he said, his mother being hounded by the paparazzi.
Yes, he repeated what he told Oprah Winfrey in 2021, that he was concerned that history would repeat itself. To me, that's making the comparison between Princess Diana and the alleged treatments of her by the press with the alleged treatments of his wife, Meghan Markle, by the press. We see in that trailer there, Meghan is crying in one clip. This was clearly filmed over an 18-month period, because in one of the clips, Meghan is clearly heavily pregnant, and she was pregnant during the Oprah interview in 2021, only a year after she left as a senior working member of the royal family. So clearly Harry is still worried, concerned for his wife and the treatment she has allegedly had from the press.
Cameron, thank you for that, and we shall watch or not on Thursday onwards. Thank you very much indeed. But some reaction coming in from you already on this. This is from Dan. I won't be watching this documentary about this odious pair. I think the only surprise will be that Meghan can actually act. Ouch. Susie, for heaven's sake, can you please defend with all your might our royal family, our country and all that we stand for, from the rantings of Prince Harry, who is now behaving like a complete nutter. This guy is in need of some sort of professional help. He has become an obsessed fanatic, and quite frankly, it's hideous. Although, of course, I think he has actually sought help for his various issues and has been open about that. On the strike action, James saying the unions are a bunch of anarchists looking for a fight. They are the pits and I am working class. Exclamation mark. Jerry, meanwhile, saying, I will vote Labour if Starmer names a date for the abolishment of the House of Lords. Strikers have my full support. Westminster and elites earn obscene salaries whilst the working classes are going to food banks to eat. And this is capital letters now. Somebody needs to start listening to the majority. Close quotes. The country is collapsing. Thanks for writing in, all of you. Keep them coming and we'll reflect your views. But that's all we've got time for the moment. Don't go too far. Patrick with you to guide you through the next few hours, bring you the latest news too from Westminster and beyond. Before that, let's get